Hello friends, I am Mr. Ghost, and I am here to help you today. I know, you use these videos to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, and relax. I've lived in this building for 3 years, and everything felt normal until last fall. That's when I first noticed something strange about the apartment down the hallway. People said it was rented, but I never saw anyone go in or come out. At night I heard sounds I couldn't explain. Heavy footsteps, a dragging noise, thumps against the walls, and muffled groans that echoed in the corridor. I didn't want to believe something weird was happening, but I couldn't ignore it. I remember the first night it really caught my attention. I was coming back from work around 11 p.m. and heard these scraping sounds near the elevator. At first I thought maybe someone was moving furniture. Then I realized it was way too late for that, and the noise didn't sound like chairs or tables. It sounded like chains dragging on concrete. I got off the elevator and stood in the hallway listening. My heart thumped in my chest. I felt my throat go dry. The corridor light flickered a bit, which it sometimes does, but at that moment every flicker made me more on edge. I turned toward my apartment, but that sound kept going, getting louder for a few seconds, then fading. I decided to walk down to the door of that empty apartment to check. It was dark, and when I pressed my ear against the door, all I heard was a low scraping, like something was sliding across the floor. My hands started shaking. I rang the bell, but no one answered. I didn't tell anyone at first. I thought if I talked about it, people would say I was paranoid, so I tried to brush it off. A couple of days later, I heard those noises again. This time around midnight. I was in my living room flipping through channels and paused everything when I caught that same dragging sound. It felt like it was right next to my wall, just beyond the hallway. Then I heard a dull thump. It made my stomach clench. I put the TV on mute, set the remote down, and held my breath. The thumping came again, then a muffled groan or moan. Hard to describe, but it sounded human. I don't like to throw around words like ghosts or spirits, so I tried to think logically. Maybe someone's in there? Maybe the landlord rented it to a night shift worker with a weird schedule, but the groans didn't sound like a regular person. They were too low, too drawn out. I got up and went to my door. I opened it quietly and peeked into the hallway. The corridor was empty. The lights were on, but everything looked still. I could almost feel the silence pressing against my ears. Then I heard a faint scraping again, as if a chain was being pulled across the floor inside that apartment. I tiptoed closer until I stood in front of the door. It felt colder there. I don't have a thermometer, but it felt like I'd stepped into a draft. I put my hand on the doorknob. The metal felt chilly, and I tried turning it, but it was locked. I wondered if maybe I should knock. Then I heard a loud thump inside. I jumped back and almost lost my balance. My pulse pounded in my ears. I mumbled something like, "Hello, is anyone in there?" Silence. I rang the bell. No answer. I waited maybe 20 more seconds, then heard nothing else, and hurried back to my place. That night I slept badly. I kept imagining that dragging sound. It made me feel uneasy, like something was off in my own home. The next morning I ran into the landlord in the lobby. I asked him casually, "Hey, who's renting units?" He gave me a confused look. He said a man named Mr. Ramirez was renting it. I shrugged and asked if Mr. Ramirez ever complained about anything. The landlord said Mr. Ramirez never called about repairs or issues. Then he changed the subject, talking about building maintenance. I decided not to push it. Things got worse about a week later. One evening I was coming back from the grocery store. My hands were full of shopping bags. I stepped out of the elevator and the hallway light was dim. I could smell something stale in the air, like an old basement or wet concrete. I checked around and didn't see anything spilled. I walked to my apartment, which is right next to the mysterious one, though separated by a small fire door. As I passed by that empty unit, I heard a creaking noise, then a long moan. My scalp tingled. I literally stopped in mid-step. The door was slightly ajar. I stared at the gap, seeing only darkness inside. My mind raced. Part of me wanted to get out of there, but I felt compelled to look. I pushed the door open with my foot. The hinges squeaked, but I didn't see any furniture. No lights, nothing. Just an empty living room with bare walls. The apartment smelled musty. like it hadn't been aired out in ages. My grocery bags felt heavy in my hands, but my palms were slick with sweat. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded weak. I got no response. I stepped inside a few feet. The floor creaked under my weight. I could see a small kitchen area to the left, completely empty. No table, no stove, nothing. I turned my head toward the bedrooms, but the doors were open, revealing bare rooms with no curtains or fixtures. I expected some sign of life. Boxes, clothes, a lamp, anything. There was nothing. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt goosebumps on my arms. The air inside was cold and slightly damp. I started imagining someone standing just out of sight, but all I saw were empty walls. I took another step. Then a faint thud came from one of the back rooms. It wasn't loud, but it sounded close. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I said, "Is someone there?" My voice echoed. No answer. I backed away until I was at the front door again. Then I slipped out and let the door close. It didn't slam. It just clicked shut. My knees felt shaky. I hurried to my apartment and locked myself in. After that, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something followed me. Late at night, whenever I walked down the hallway, I felt a presence right behind me, like someone was brushing the back of my neck. My ears would pick up soft scraping steps. My heart rate would jump, and I'd glance over my shoulder, seeing nothing. It happened repeatedly. Each time I sped up to my door, got inside, and locked it as fast as I could. Then I'd stand there, back against the door, chest rising and falling, feeling like I'd barely escaped something I couldn't define. One night I decided I needed concrete proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I took my phone and went into the hallway, standing by that empty apartment. I made sure to record. The corridor was silent, except for the soft buzz of the ceiling light. I spoke into the phone, saying what time it was and saying I was checking the noises I'd heard. At first there was nothing. I felt silly just standing there. But then, right when I was about to stop recording, I heard a knock. 3 knocks, slow and heavy, coming from the inside of that apartment door. My mouth went dry. I stared at the door, phone still recording. I whispered, "Hello?" A faint scraping sound followed, then silence. My hand shook so much, I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't even think about opening the door this time. I turned off the recording and sprinted back to my apartment. When I played the audio later, I could hear the knocks but no scraping noise. Still, the knocks were enough to freak me out. That's when I started losing sleep. Every night I waited for something to happen. Sometimes the noises were loud, sometimes they were faint, but I always ended up sweating in my bed, listening for the next creak or thump. I began checking the hallway several times a night, half expecting to find the door wide open again, but it stayed closed. Yet, I felt that presence out there. It felt stronger each day, like it was pressing on the walls. My stomach was in knots all the time. I caught myself snapping at coworkers and avoiding friends' calls because I was too stressed. One evening, around 2 a.m., I had gotten up to get a drink of water. I heard a light knock on my front door. It was so soft that I wasn't sure if I imagined it. My heart pounded. I stood still in my hallway, glass of water in hand, and listened. Another light knock came. I set the glass on the kitchen counter and walked to the door. My peephole doesn't work well. It's old and foggy. I pressed my eye against it, but all I saw was a shadow. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, breathing quietly. I swear I heard a faint whisper on the other side, but I couldn't make out any words, then nothing. I waited another minute, then slowly unlatched the door and opened it a crack. The corridor was empty, lights on, same stale smell. No one was there. I locked up and didn't sleep at all that night. I started thinking maybe I should move, but I'd already paid for the next few months. Plus, I didn't have any clear explanation for what was happening. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational reason, but the apartment looked abandoned even though it was listed as rented. The landlord insisted someone lived there, but I never saw them. The footsteps, the moans, the scraping, none of it added up. About a week ago, I noticed something even stranger. I was walking towards my door after work, and I saw a set of footprints on the hallway floor, as if someone had walked through dust or water. They led from the elevator to the empty apartment's door. I could see the outline of shoes bigger than mine. I knelt down and touched one print. It felt damp. It smelled musty, like the inside of that apartment. I looked around to see if there was a leak, but there was nothing obvious. I followed the footprints. They ended abruptly at the apartment door. I stood there breathing fast, feeling my chest tighten. Then I noticed the door was slightly open again. I can describe the sensation I felt, but it was like a chill crawling up my legs. I nudged the door with my foot. It swung open easily. No footprints inside, just that same bare floor and walls. The place looked dark. I didn't step in this time. I let the door close and hurried away. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence was stronger. Maybe even standing right outside my door. I sat on my couch, TV on low volume, lights off except for a small lamp. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to open on its own. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The hair on my arms stood on end, as if I were cold, but my forehead was sweaty. Every small noise made me jump. A car outside, the hum of the fridge, a pipe clanking in the wall. Sometimes around 3 a.m. I heard a soft scraping sound at my door, almost like fingernails on wood. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. The sound lasted a few seconds, then stopped. I stayed frozen on the couch, barely breathing, until sunrise light came through the window. I tried talking to the landlord again the next day. He got defensive, saying Mr. Ramirez pays his rent and there's no problem. I asked if he'd ever seen the inside of that apartment recently. He shrugged and said something about privacy. He seemed uncomfortable. I left feeling frustrated. My stomach was in knots. I thought about knocking the door down one day just to see what was really inside, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Part of me was terrified of what I might find. Now, every time I walk to my door, I sense someone behind me. I feel a light breeze on the back of my neck, and my chest tightens. I walk faster, fumbling with my keys. My mind starts racing. What if I don't get in fast enough? There's this overwhelming urge to slam my door the moment I step inside. Sometimes I do, then I press my ear against it, expecting to hear footsteps or knocking. Once in a while I hear a soft sound, like fabric brushing against the door, or a faint moan. It lasts a few seconds and then disappears. Afterward, I just stand there, my breath rapid, telling myself I'm safe. A few nights ago, I tried to get some sleep around midnight. I heard a violent thump next door, loud enough that it made the walls vibrate. I jumped out of bed in panic. I put on some clothes and rushed into the hallway. The corridor was empty. The door to that apartment was closed. My heart felt like it was in my throat. I stood there, feeling sweat drip down my temples, and just listened. A dragging noise came from inside. I heard something that sounded like a chain hitting the floor. My chest felt tight. I said, "What the hell is this?" My voice sounded shaky. I pounded on the door once, just a single hit. Nothing. Then a second thump from the other side made me stumble back. It was so sudden and loud that I felt it in my bones. I ran back to my apartment, locked the door, and slid down to the floor, leaning against it. I stayed there for an hour, my body tense, my mind going in circles. I didn't sleep that night. Now I'm at a point where every sound in the hallway sets me on edge. Every time I come home from work, I feel dread in the pit of my stomach. My entire routine revolves around trying to avoid that apartment door. I'm always looking over my shoulder. I can't focus on normal life anymore. Even watching TV or scrolling through my phone doesn't distract me for long. Whenever the building gets quiet, I'm reminded of the sounds next door. I imagine the chain-dragging footsteps in those muffled groans. I think about the dark, empty rooms I saw one time I went inside. It looked like no one had lived there for decades. Yet the landlord insists there's a tenant. I've started thinking about leaving this place. I can't handle the anxiety and lack of sleep much longer. The idea that something unseen is trailing me every time I enter or leave my apartment is making me paranoid. Some nights I sit up in bed, convinced I hear movement right outside my door. I imagine the doorknob turning or the chain dragging across the corridor floor. My chest tightens and my skin feels clammy. I reach for my phone, but I don't know who I could call at that hour. If I told my friends, they'd think I was losing it, and maybe I am. But the sounds are real, the door is real, and the presence I feel is impossible to deny. I'm determined to get out of here soon. I don't want to deal with more sleepless nights, or the creeping dread that crawls up my spine every time I come up the elevator. I don't want to feel that chill at my back like something is following me down the hallway. I don't want to see that door ajar, leading into a place that shouldn't be empty but is. No furniture, No decorations, no trace of a real tenant. Just cold air and an oppressive feeling that I can describe with logic. I'm done living next to whatever that is. I just want to be somewhere I can sleep without imagining chains dragging across the floor or hearing those awful groans through the walls. This is where I am now, on edge, anxious and waiting for my lease to end. Every time I approach my apartment, I feel like I have to run a gauntlet. I get my keys out, rush to the door, and lock myself inside before anything can happen. Sometimes I stand there, my ear against the wood, hearing faint noises next door, wondering if the presence is right there, inches away on the other side. I don't look through the peephole anymore because I'm afraid I'll see something looking back at me. I just hope I can hold it together long enough to pack my things and leave. Until then, I live with the constant feeling that I'm not alone. That something is watching, waiting, making its presence known in a place that should be empty, but never really is. I first heard the strange sound on a Wednesday night. I was trying to sleep when I noticed a soft, off-key tune drifting through my bedroom window. At first I thought it was just the wind whistling through old trees behind my apartment. But the sound had a pattern, even though it was slow and uneven. I got up and looked outside. The moon was full, and everything seemed too quiet. My heart started pounding because I remembered that old mansion down the road. I had explored it a few times just out of curiosity. There was a grand piano in its main hall, completely out of tune and covered with dust. It hadn't been played in years, but I couldn't ignore the weird sense that this melody was coming from inside that place. I slipped on my jacket, walked outside, and headed toward the mansion. The streetlights were dim. The air was cold. My breath formed small clouds in front of my face. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached the rusted iron gate, my palms were damp. I thought about turning around. My gut told me this might not be a good idea, but curiosity won out. I pushed the gate open and it creaked loudly, as if warning me to leave. I forced myself to keep going. The path to the mansion was a gravel walkway scattered with weeds. My shoes crunched the stones, and the sound bounced off the silent walls of the building ahead. The front door was slightly ajar, just like it always was. Nobody bothered to seal this place up, and nobody seemed to care that it stood there rotting in plain sight. I stepped inside. The main foyer smelled damp like wet wood and mold. Moonlight spilled through the cracked windows, giving me just enough light to see the tall ceilings and peeling wildboar. The wide staircase was off to my right, but I didn't focus on that. I could hear the faint sound of piano keys echoing from the back of the mansion. I moved toward the source of the sound, following the corridor that led to the grand hall. My legs felt weak, but I kept going. I noticed cobwebs along the corners and dust coating the floor. The walls had old portraits that were faded, but I didn't look too close at them. I wasn't interested in details. I wanted to know who or what was making that music. As I approached the wide-arched entrance to the hall, the melody got a bit clearer. It wasn't a smooth tune. Some notes were correct, but others were off. The timing was slow and uneven. When I stepped into the hall, I saw the grand piano in the center of the room. The lid was propped open, and the keys were moving by themselves. There was no one on the bench. I stopped in my tracks. My heart pounded so hard that I felt dizzy. My mouth went dry. I didn't move for a few seconds, just watching those keys go down in a pattern that made no sense. The notes were loud but clashed. The left side of the piano seemed to follow a steady bass line, but it was missing notes. The right side tapped a few higher keys, but they were random. Sounded like a confused attempt at a sad tune. I stepped closer. My shoes scuffed against the dusty wooden floor, making a noise that startled me more than it should have. The piano kept playing. I could see the keys press down and spring back. It was like somebody was sitting there pressing them with invisible hands. I got close enough to touch the piano. My arm was shaking. I placed my hand on the smooth edge. It felt cold, colder than the air around me. The wood was cracked in a few places, and the varnish was chipped. The entire piano looked worn out, like it had been abandoned for decades. Yet those keys moved. The sound echoed off the high ceiling. I felt something in my chest, a tightness that made me want to step back. Instead, I watched the keys for a minute, trying to understand any pattern. Sometimes there was a slow, melancholic sequence that almost formed a recognizable tune. Other times the keys banged out dissonant chords that made me wince. I leaned over the keys to see if there might be wires or something mechanical. I couldn't see anything. The top of the bench was empty. There was just enough moonlight for me to catch the movement of the worn ivory. I took a deep breath. My nose was filled with the smell of old wood and dust, and my throat felt dry, so I swallowed hard. I tried to calm my racing heart. I thought about the stories I'd heard from a few neighbors. They said this mansion was haunted. I never believed them. I always assumed it was just a creepy old place that nobody maintained. Now I wasn't so sure. I reached out toward one of the moving keys. My fingertip touched the surface just as it pressed down. It felt like there was nothing there. Yet, the key moved under some invisible force. My wrist tensed, and I pulled back. I listened to the discordant melody for another few seconds. It sounded uncertain, like a beginner plinking away at a lesson, but without any teacher to guide them. My legs felt shaky, so I stepped back to steady myself. I noticed my breath was shallow and my pulse was going wild. My forehead was damp with sweat. I wiped it with my sleeve. There was a faint breeze through a broken window in the corner of the hall, which made the curtains shift a little, letting more moonlight in. The piano lid cast a strange shadow on the wall that almost looked like a hunched figure, but I knew it was just the outline of the piano. I moved around to the side of the piano, half expecting to see some mechanism. Instead, I saw only the wooden frame, the strings, and the dust. The faint moonlight made it hard to see inside, but I could make out the metal frame that held the strings, which was rusty in parts and had a few loose strings. I tried to figure out how anything could be producing a sound at all, but I couldn't see any reason for the keys to move. I felt my hands start trembling. My stomach churned. I realized I was in a situation that made no sense. After a few minutes, I noticed the melody was slowing down. The notes got more spaced apart, as if the invisible presence was losing interest or energy. The final chord clanged in an awkward jumble of notes. Then the keys stopped moving. The hall became silent again. My ears buzzed with the sudden lack of noise. My heart was still racing. I stood there waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. I took a few steps back, my eyes fixed on the piano, half expecting it to start again. But it didn't. The keys stayed still. I decided to leave. My mind felt overwhelmed, and my body tense. I turned on my heel and walked back the way I came. My footsteps sounded too loud on the wooden floor. I reached the foyer and paused for a second near the front door. I glanced back at the hall. Everything was dark. I heard no sound. I left through the door and pushed it shut behind me. The quiet night air felt like a relief, but I couldn't shake the chill I felt inside. The next day, I tried to go about my normal routine. I went to work, ate dinner, and watched TV, but I couldn't stop thinking about that piano. I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was half asleep, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But I remembered every detail, from the cold touch of the piano's wood to the discordant sounds. I decided to keep it to myself. I didn't see any reason to tell other people and sound like a complete lunatic. A week passed. I had trouble sleeping. Every night I listened for that melody, but I only heard the usual evening sounds. Cars in the distance, the hum of my fridge, and the occasional barking dog. But on the next full moon I heard it again. It was around midnight when the faint melody reached my ears. I recognized the odd pattern of notes. My body tensed, and I felt a rush of cold sweat. For a moment I tried to ignore it, but my curiosity was too strong. I put on my shoes and a sweatshirt. The same path led me to the mansion's gate. It was just as before, a quiet night, a bright moon, and a heavy feeling in my chest. I walked inside, my footsteps echoing in the foyer. I headed straight to the hall. This time I saw the piano keys moving as soon as I entered. The melody was similar to what I'd heard that first night, slow, uneven, and sad. The notes clashed, but there was a pattern that felt almost familiar. I stepped forward carefully. My breath felt tight. I sat on the bench this time, about a foot away from the path of the moving keys. I put my hand near them, but not touching. I could feel a slight chill in the air by the keys, like a cool draft. I watched them go up and down. Occasionally they seemed to hover, as if uncertain which key to press next. The sound was louder with my ear so close. It made my spine tingle. I looked at the strings inside the piano. They vibrated when the keys moved, and I could see them shudder with each note. My chest felt heavy, and my arms were tense. But I stayed there. I wanted to see if I could learn anything from this. After a minute, I tried pressing a key myself. I chose a note that I thought might fit the pattern. When I pressed it, the piano produced a dull sound, definitely out of tune. The invisible presence stopped playing for a second as if it noticed me. Then it resumed, ignoring the note I had chosen. I swallowed a lump in my throat and tried another key. The presence paused again, hit a couple more keys, then went back to the original random pattern. I had a strange thought that it was attempting to mimic the tune of an old song. But every time it got close, it messed up a few notes, then jumbled a chord and continued with that depressed, uncertain sequence. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe it was 10 minutes. My back ached from sitting so stiffly. My palms were sweating. The music kept going until all at once it stopped again. The final note hung in the air, ringing for a moment, then faded into silence. The keys lifted and stayed still. I moved my hand over them to see if there was any leftover movement. There was nothing. The hall fell silent. My ears rang from the abrupt change. I stood out, feeling the weight in my legs. My breathing was unsteady. I ran my hand along the edge of the piano, feeling the rough patches where the wood had cracked. My mind kept racing with questions, but I had no answers. I had just seen something impossible, or at least I couldn't explain it in any ordinary way. That night I went home feeling unsettled. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about that lonely piano. It seemed like something was trapped, trying to play a piece it didn't understand. But I pushed those thoughts away. I had no interest in exploring ideas about ghosts or spirits. I just knew what I saw and heard. Over the next month I went back to the mansion a few more times. On random nights, I would go in and check the hall. Sometimes the piano was silent. Sometimes it played that same broken melody. Each time, I felt that same tension build in my chest. My skin prickled and my senses went on high alert. I watched the keys try different chords, repeating certain parts and getting stuck on a high note. It was eerie, but I got a bit more comfortable with it. I didn't feel threatened, just uneasy. One night, I decided to see if I could fix a few strings, or at least tune 1 or 2 keys, even though I'm not a professional. The piano looked ancient, but I thought maybe I could get a clearer sound. I brought some basic tools. I propped the lid up and took a look. The interior was dusty, and the metal frame had patches of rust. I lifted the small panel that covers the tuning pins. Many of them looked loose or corroded. I tried tightening one of the pins. It made a creaking sound, and the string shifted slightly. I tested the key, and it sounded a little better. I kept going for about half an hour, adjusting a few pins that were accessible. My hands got filthy from the dust and grime. Suddenly I heard a faint note ring out from the piano, but I hadn't touched any keys. My heart jumped. I froze, my hands still on a tuning pin. The note repeated twice, like someone was testing the key. Then it stopped. My nerves were on edge. I put down the tool and stepped away. The key didn't move again. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I packed up and left. My body was shaking a bit as I walked back to the gate. When I reached the sidewalk, I took a deep breath of the cool night air and tried to steady my pulse. I hadn't solved anything. The piano was still a mystery, but I realized something. I wasn't just scared, I was also drawn to this strange occurrence. The old mansion, the lonely hall, and the piano that played itself were unsettling, but I couldn't seem to stay away. I kept an eye on the moon cycles from that point on. Every time it got close to full, I felt a prick of anxiety in my chest. I would go to sleep with my ears tuned for that melody. When it came, I would walk to the mansion and watch as the piano repeated that same broken, melancholy tune. The keys would jump under that invisible force, pausing, searching, playing off-key chords. My heart would race, my stomach would twist, but I kept going back. I never found any clear explanation. No visible figure ever appeared. I never heard a voice or saw anything beyond those moving keys. It was just the piano, making those sounds that didn't belong in a normal world. Now I accept that the piano will be there, doing its odd performance whenever the moon is full. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell somebody about it, but I've kept it to myself. I don't want to bring attention to that place. I can't imagine what people would do if they came in crowds or tried to destroy it. I also can't imagine what it would mean if someone managed to stop the piano from playing. Maybe the hall would fall silent forever. Maybe that would be a relief, or maybe it would feel like losing a secret that only I know. I still feel that cold grip of fear every time I hear the first note. My scalp tingles, my stomach lurches, and my hands get clammy. But I keep going back. The keys still move on their own. The notes are still off-key. The hall still stands there, decaying a little more each year. But nothing else has happened. I haven't found any answers. I'm just someone who's witnessed something strange that I can't explain, and that's the entire truth of it. I walked into that mansion around noon. The sun was bright outside, and I could feel the heat on my neck as soon as I stepped out of my car. The guide met me at the entrance. He was polite and seemed eager to show me the artwork in the main hall. I noticed the mansion's age from the chipped paint around the doorframe and the worn stone steps. When I stepped into the foyer, the smell of old furniture and damp walls hit my nose. The place felt stuck in time. The floors creaked with every step, and the silence between each creak made me aware of how empty the corridors were. During the official tour, I looked at various paintings hanging on walls with peeling wallpaper. Most pieces were portraits of stern-looking people I didn't recognize. The guide pointed out some known artists and explained the history of each piece. I took notes on my phone because I wanted to stay organized. At one point we passed by a door on the second floor. It was thick, dark wood with old iron hinges. A sturdy lock was set above the handle. I tried to peek in through the gap near the frame, but I only saw darkness. When I asked about it, the guide said it was unavailable. He didn't even stop walking when he gave me that answer. I let it go for the moment, but I felt a twinge of curiosity. After the tour, I sat with the estate manager to talk about the collection's value. The manager was polite, but insisted that certain areas of the mansion weren't open to visitors. I nodded and pretended I didn't care. Deep down, I was fixated on that locked door upstairs. The manager offered me a guest room on the first floor for the night. I accepted because it saved me a trip back, and also gave me the chance to look around when nobody else was there. The staff left around 8 in the evening. They locked the main entrance behind them, but they left me with a key to a side door in case I needed to go out. I didn't plan to leave, though. I planned to investigate. The quiet in that place made my ears ring. I walked through the halls using my phone's flashlight to guide me. Most lights had been turned off to save electricity, I guess. The air smelled musty, like wet cardboard. My steps echoed. I noticed small details I hadn't seen earlier. Scratches on baseboards, tiny cracks in the plaster, and dust gathered on high shelves. When I reached the second floor, I felt a chill. The temperature dropped, and I rubbed my arms to stay warm. I approached the locked door, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like a little challenge. I tried the handle once more just to confirm it was still locked. I stood there for a minute thinking about my options. I remembered seeing an old ring of keys in the kitchen earlier. Maybe one of them would fit. I went downstairs, found a ring of keys on a hook near the pantry, and returned to the second floor. I tried each key one by one. None of them worked. I didn't want to break the door because I wasn't that desperate, but I knew older locks sometimes had certain weaknesses. I took out a small pocket knife that I keep in my bag. I fiddled with the lock, feeling the pins inside. After a few tries, I heard a click. My hands were sweaty, so I wiped my palms on my jeans. Then I turned the handle and pushed. The door opened with a low creak. The hinges made a scraping noise like they hadn't moved in years. I stepped inside, my phone's flashlight pointed forward. The room was empty. The walls were bare except for faint marks that looked like discolored patches. I shone my light on them. They were shaped like hands, but the paint or whatever caused them had faded. Dozens of overlapping handprints covered the walls. Some were high near the ceiling, others were low near the floor. I took a few steps closer, running my free hand over the surface. I felt small ridges under my fingertips. It was like the handprints had been pressed into the wall a long time ago, leaving shallow impressions. The temperature felt even colder inside that room. My breath felt heavier as if the air was dense. I didn't see any furniture or decorations. There was just dust on the floor, and those faded marks. I stood there, staring at the walls. The quiet was overwhelming. I could hear my own breathing. Then I felt a sudden pressure in my chest. It was like someone was pushing against my sternum from the inside. I took a deeper breath to shake it off, but it didn't go away. My flashlight beam trembled because my hands were shaking. I rubbed my chest, trying to calm myself down. Then I heard a dull thumping noise. It was rhythmic and matched the beat of my heart. My ears rang, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I aimed my phone's flashlight at each wall, but I didn't see anything move. The noise seemed to come from all around me, like the walls were beating in unison with my pulse. I walked to the center of the room. The pressure in my chest got stronger, and I started to feel short of breath. My throat felt tight, and I swallowed hard. The thumping grew louder. I looked at the door to see if I had accidentally closed it. It was still open, but it felt like the air in the room was thicker than in the hallway. I stepped back, feeling an urge to leave, but at the same time I couldn't shake my curiosity. I took a few pictures of the handprints, wanting to have some proof of what I saw. The camera flash lit up the room for an instant, and the walls seemed to glow with each photo. My hands felt cold, and I noticed goosebumps along my arms. The banging against the walls kept going in sync with my heartbeat. My heart was racing now, so the bangs came in rapid succession. I moved the flashlight along each corner, but there was nothing there except dust and old boards. Then I stepped closer to one large handprint near the middle of the wall. It was slightly darker than the others, maybe a different shade of paint or stain. I placed my hand over it, trying to match the shape. It was bigger than my own hand. When my skin touched the cold surface, I felt a jolt run up my arm. My fingertips tingled. My chest felt tight again. I jerked my hand away and took a step back. I noticed my breathing turning shallow and fast. My lungs felt like they weren't getting enough air. The pounding sound got louder, and I started to panic. I wiped the sweat from my brow and tried to steady myself. My mind was racing. I wanted to leave, but I also had this urge to understand what was happening. My phone's battery was at half, so I still had some light. I pointed it at the ceiling. Nothing unusual, just old wood beams. I scanned the floor again. Dust and footprints. My own footprints, I realized, from where I had just walked. No other signs of recent movement. But the entire time, those faint handprints seemed to stare back at me, even though they had no eyes. I glanced at the open doorway. The hallway outside was dark. I figured I could step out for a moment, catch my breath, and come back in. My heart was still hammering, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. I walked toward the door. The second my foot crossed the threshold, the pounding in my ears decreased. It didn't stop completely, but it felt more distant. The pressure in my chest eased up. I stood there in the hallway breathing, letting the cool air calm me. The corridor was silent except for a low hum from somewhere in the distance, maybe the old pipes or the heating system. I checked my phone's time. It was a little past midnight. Part of me wanted to head straight to my room, lock the door, and forget about that place. But the rational side of my brain said maybe I should look again. I wanted to know if the sensation would come back. My curiosity often leads me into situations that I question later, but I just can't help it. I took a few steps back into the room. The thumping noise returned, syncing with my heart again. My pulse sped up, and so did the banging. I felt goosebumps forming on my arms again. I focused on keeping my breathing steady, inhaling through my nose and exhaling through my mouth. I wanted to see if the handprints changed. I aimed my flashlight at each wall, one by one. They looked the same, just as faint, just as numerous. But something about the largest one caught my eye. It seemed to pulse or flicker. I moved closer to check if maybe my flashlight was playing tricks. The wall surface looked normal, except for that imprint. My vision started to blur for a moment. I blinked and shook my head. My chest felt heavy again, like there was weight pressing down on me. I decided I'd had enough. My gut told me I should leave. I backed away from the wall, keeping my phone's light trained on it until I reached the doorway. Then I stepped into the hall, grabbed the door handle, and pulled the door shut. I heard the lock's mechanism click as it latched. I felt immediate relief, as though a tension string inside my body had loosened. I stood in the hallway for a minute, listening for any more banging. There was nothing except the faint creaks of the old building. I leaned against the wall, breathing slowly to calm myself. The air outside that room felt lighter, and my heart was still racing but not pounding as hard. I wiped sweat from my forehead and tried to steady my legs. They felt a little shaky. I caught my reflection in a dusty mirror hanging nearby. My eyes looked wide, and my face was pale. I didn't look calm at all. I turned off my flashlight and walked downstairs in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. I passed the main hall, where the paintings hung. Their faces were barely visible in the dim light, but I could sense them all around. I kept moving until I reached the guest room I'd been assigned. Once inside, I locked the door and turned on a small table lamp. I sat on the edge of the bed and noticed my heartbeat was still fast, though the pressure in my chest was gone. My shirt was damp from sweat. The silence felt oppressive, but at least the banging had stopped. I kicked off my shoes and lay back on the bed. I stared at the ceiling, not really seeing anything, just trying to calm my mind. I was still trying to make sense of the handprints and that awful pressure. I didn't want to dwell on it too deeply because my body was exhausted, and I needed rest. My phone was next to me. Its battery was down to I scrolled through the photos I had taken in that room. Each one showed a dull, empty space with dark smears on the walls. The handprints were clear in some pictures, though faint. I zoomed in on one. The edges of the print looked smudged, like it had been pressed into wet plaster years ago. There was no sign of movement in the photos, no sign of anything supernatural, but I remembered that feeling, the tightness, the pounding in my ears. I turned off the phone and tried to sleep. I tossed and turned for about an hour. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined those handprints surrounding me. The memory of that pressure in my chest made me shiver. I tried to calm down by focusing on the present, my breathing, my body on the mattress, the distant hum of the mansion's old heater. Eventually, my adrenaline dropped enough that I drifted off. I woke up to a dim light coming through the curtains. My back was stiff from sleeping in such a tense position. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, recalling everything from the night before. My mouth was dry, so I went to the small bathroom next to the bed, splashed water on my face, and drank straight from the faucet. I felt a lingering unease. The idea of stepping back into that upstairs hallway made my stomach churn. Still, I wanted to confirm that last night wasn't just a bad dream. I got dressed, grabbed my phone, and opened the guest room door. The corridor was quiet. The mansion seemed lifeless. Nobody else was there yet. I climbed the stairs slowly. The second-floor hallway looked the same as before, just empty and old. I walked to that locked door. The lock was still in place. I reached out and tried the handle. Still locked. A small part of me felt relieved, another part felt uneasy, remembering the feeling of opening that door. I stood there for a moment, my heart picking up speed again. But the hallway was just a hallway now. No cold breeze, no strange noises. I decided it was best not to push my luck. I walked away, heading downstairs. I needed to prepare a final report on the art collection, and I figured I could do that quickly, and then get out of there. While I worked, I kept thinking about that room. The memory of the banging in sync with my pulse still gave me a tight feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to try unlocking it again. I told myself the best course of action was to leave it alone. Around 9 in the morning, the estate manager arrived. We exchanged basic greetings. He asked if I slept well. I lied and said I did. He didn't mention the locked door, and I didn't bring it up either. I finished my appraisal as fast as I could. Then I packed up my notes, said my farewells, and walked out of that place. The sky was clear, and the morning sun felt warm on my skin. I felt some relief with each step I took away from the mansion. I haven't gone back since. I still have the photos on my phone. Sometimes I look at them, but I never see anything beyond those old handprints on the walls. Still, my heart rate goes up every time. I remember the pressure in my chest, the dryness in my throat, and the way those thumping sounds matched my own pulse. That's enough for me to stay away. I don't know what's behind that door now, and I don't plan to find out again. I've been in this old house for only a few weeks, and I already feel like I haven't slept in a year. The first time I walked in, the air felt stale, like it had been locked inside these walls for decades. Dust covered every piece of furniture, and the floor creaked even under my lightest step. I chose this place because it was cheap and isolated. At the time, I thought I needed solitude. Now I'm not so sure. When I first moved in, I started by cleaning the living room. I carried in my few belongings, set up a small couch, plugged in a lamp, and then got to work. Then, I swept the floor and tried to make the room look at least somewhat welcoming. However, every time I moved a piece of furniture, I found more cobwebs and piles of dirt in the corners. By the end of that day, I was exhausted. I leaned back on my couch, stared at the peeling wallpaper, and told myself I'd tackle the rest of the house later. A few nights in, I began to notice a strange atmosphere. At first, I thought it was just the loneliness playing tricks on me. This house has a lot of rooms, most of them empty or filled with old junk from whoever lived here before me. There's a small study next to the living room, a kitchen that still smells like rotted wood, a dining room with a long table and mismatched chairs, and a second floor with 3 bedrooms. That doesn't even include the damp basement. The basement is the worst part of the house. No matter what the weather is like outside, the basement floor always looks wet, and the walls drip with moisture. I noticed a weird odor coming from below on the first night. It smelled like mildew mixed with something else. I couldn't place it, but it made me a little nauseous. I remember setting down a bucket of cleaning supplies by the basement door and thinking I'd go down there the next day to see if there was a leak. But I never found a leak. The basement walls were simply clammy, and the air felt heavy. I thought maybe the old drainage system was causing extra moisture, so I opened a few windows upstairs during the day, hoping to improve the ventilation. It didn't help much. Around the same time, I started hearing noises at night. They sounded like muffled voices. I'd be in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, and I'd hear what seemed like a group of people whispering all at once. The whispers never formed any clear words. They just rose and fell in a way that made my heart pound. At first, I tried telling myself it was the wind or some old pipe shifting in the walls, that it happened every night around the same time, usually after midnight. After several nights of this, I decided to go down to the basement with a flashlight. I wanted to prove to myself that there was nothing down there, so I climbed out of bed, put on my slippers, and slowly opened the basement door. The smell hit me harder than before. The air felt even thicker than I remembered, like it was pressing down on me. I switched on my flashlight and took one step at a time. Each stair squeaked under my weight. My grip tightened on the railing, because I was afraid I might trip on something unexpected. At the bottom of the steps, I saw a few piles of old boxes and a couple of broken chairs. There was an old couch leaning against the far wall. The fabric was ripped, and it looked like it had been there for years. I walked around, shining my flashlight on every corner. The sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere in the back, but I couldn't see any actual leak. I checked behind some of the boxes, thinking maybe there were pipes or vents that could be carrying sounds from outside, but I found nothing useful. I waited down there for a few minutes, listening. The only things I heard were my own breathing and the steady drip. I went back upstairs feeling cold and tense. I didn't hear the whispers again that night, so I told myself maybe I was just tired. Maybe the stress of moving had gotten to me. That explanation worked for about a day, until the noises came back the next night. This time they sounded closer. I could almost feel them right beneath my feet when I stood in the living room. I tried turning on the TV to drown them out, but I still sensed those faint whispers underneath the noise of the program. It was unsettling enough that I decided to sleep on the couch instead of going up to my bedroom. I woke up the next morning with a stiff neck, angry at myself for letting some weird noises disrupt my routine. I wanted to get more cleaning done, so I spent the entire day upstairs, dusting shelves and scrubbing the floors. I found old newspapers in one of the bedrooms, but I didn't have the energy to read them. The entire time I felt like I was being watched. I kept turning around, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but there was never anyone there. As the sun went down, I realized I hadn't eaten much all day. I went to the kitchen, put together a quick meal, and tried to focus on normal tasks. I washed dishes, dried them, and glanced at the basement door more times than I can count. I was dreading the moment those whispers would start. It was like waiting for a storm that was coming. That night, the voices didn't just stay below. I swore I heard them in the hallway near the stairs to the second floor. My stomach twisted, and my hands started to shake. I walked toward the sound, and my heart thumped so hard that my breath came in short bursts. When I got close, everything stopped. The hallway was quiet. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stood there feeling my pulse in my temples. After a few seconds, I turned around to head back to the living room, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow move across the wall. I froze. It was gone as soon as I focused on it, but my skin broke out in goosebumps. I thought maybe it was just my imagination. I rubbed my eyes and decided I needed to call it a night. I went up to my bedroom, tried to shut the door, and realized the door frame was slightly warped. It wouldn't close all the way. There was this small gap between the door and the frame, and it looked like a dark void. It made me uneasy, but I was too tired to fuss with it, so I just tried to sleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. because I heard that same whispering. Only this time, it felt like it was right outside my door. My body tensed, and I listened carefully. The sound was low and constant, like multiple voices speaking over each other. My legs felt stiff, and a chill ran from my neck down my back. I stayed still, not wanting to move. The whispers went on for about a minute, then faded. When I finally got up the nerve to check the hallway, I saw nothing. A few days later, I explored the basement again because the damp smell was getting worse. I dragged down a larger flashlight from a broom, thinking I might do a more thorough sweep. I nudged aside a few boxes that I had barely touched before. Inside them, I found old picture frames, rusted tools, and pieces of clothing. None of it explained the voices or the constant wetness on the walls. While I was down there, I heard a sound behind me that made me jump. It was like a soft scraping noise. I spun around, shining the flashlight everywhere. But I only saw the couch, some shelves, and those broken chairs. My skin prickled. I felt an urge to run back upstairs, but I forced myself to keep looking. I searched every corner. I even moved the couch to check behind it, but all I saw were more cobwebs and a few small cracks in the wall. When I finally decided I'd had enough, I rushed upstairs. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the flashlight. I slammed the basement door behind me and locked it, even though I knew that probably wouldn't make much difference. Then I leaned against the door, breathing hard. My shirt was damp with sweat, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. After a few minutes, I walked into the living room and realized the place felt different. The air was colder, and I noticed a strange draft coming from somewhere, but couldn't locate it. That night, while I was trying to watch some late-night show, the lights flickered. I got a jolt in my chest. I stood up, ready to check the breaker, but the lights came back on. That's when I felt a presence behind me. It was like someone was standing a few inches away watching me. The hair on my arm stood up, and my mouth went dry. I turned around quickly, but I was alone. My heart kept racing. I went into the kitchen, gripped the edge of the counter, and took a few deep breaths. There was no logical reason for me to feel like something was behind me, but I couldn't shake it. The next day, I tried to stay busy. I replaced some light bulbs, dragged a broken chair outside, and opened as many windows as I could to air the place out. I even played some music on my phone to break the silence. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Each time I looked directly at where I thought I saw something, there was nothing. My hands would start sweating, and my breathing would quicken. I kept wiping my palms on my jeans, telling myself I was just jumpy. I had to face the basement again that evening because I wanted to check if any water was pooling on the floor. When I opened the door, I heard the faint sound of those voices. I held my breath, listening. It was there, just below the range of normal hearing, like a constant murmur. My legs felt weak, but I walked down anyway. My flashlight flickered a bit, so I tapped it, hoping the batteries weren't dying. The smell was worse than ever. A mix of damp earth and something sour lingered in the air. I stepped around the boxes, trying to pinpoint where the voices were coming from. The further I went, the more I felt that subtle vibration in the floorboards. It was like the house itself was humming. I shone my light on the walls, searching for any hole or crack that might be letting in outside noise. Nothing looked unusual apart from the constant dampness. I crouched down and pressed my ear against one of the walls. I felt a slight tremor, but I couldn't tell if it was in my head or actually there. Suddenly, I heard a clatter behind me. It sounded like metal hitting concrete. I jumped to my feet, spun around, and found a rusted screwdriver on the floor. It must have fallen off one of the shelves. My heart raced and I could barely breathe. I had to get out of there. I hurried back to the stairs, tripping on the bottom step. My knees slammed into the edge and I let out a grunt of pain. I scrambled up the rest of the steps, flung the door shut, and clicked the lock again. Once upstairs, I limped to the couch, massaging my knee. It hurt, but not as much as the panic throbbing in my chest. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't have any close friends in this new town. I sat there rubbing my temples, telling myself I had to calm down. Later that night, I thought I saw a dark shape glide across the living room wall. It was quick, like a shadow, but there was nothing in the room that could have caused it. I leaped to my feet, my heart banging against my ribcage. My hands shook as I pointed the flashlight at every corner. There was nobody there. The house was silent, but the silence was almost as bad as the voices. My ears rang from the tension. I barely slept. When morning came, I decided to go into town for a while to clear my head. I drove around, picked up groceries, and sat in a cafe for an hour, not really doing anything. I just needed to be around other people. Eventually, I headed back, forcing myself to face this place again. I unlocked the door and felt that same stale air rush past me. I placed the groceries on the kitchen counter, trying not to look at the basement door. I told myself I would ignore any weird noises and focus on organizing my stuff. It didn't take long for that plan to fail. As soon as night fell, I felt uneasy. My back muscles tensed up, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I kept the TV on for background noise, but the house felt charged. Around midnight, I turned off the TV and tried to go to bed. As I climbed the stairs, I heard a scuttling sound behind the walls. It could have been mice, but it sounded larger. I paused on the steps listening. Then I heard a whisper almost right next to my ear. My heart felt like it stopped. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight. No one was there, but I felt a gust of cold air move past me. I bolted into my bedroom and slammed the door. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. After what felt like hours, I heard the floorboards outside my room creaking. It was slow and deliberate, like footsteps. I held my breath and stared at the door. I watched the gap at the bottom, waiting to see movement or shadows. Nothing happened, but I could still hear those steps, one at a time, moving back and forth. I don't know how long it lasted. Eventually, I must have dozed off because I woke up to daylight shining through the window. My entire body was stiff, and my head ached from stress. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fear. I told myself I would do one more inspection of the basement. If I couldn't find a reason for those voices, I'd think about leaving. I just needed some explanation. That brings me to now. I've been pacing around the living room for the last hour, trying to work up the courage to open that door again. I keep hearing faint thumps below and every so often sense a presence behind me. My skin tingles and my mouth feels dry. I don't know if there's anything tangible down there or if I'm just going out of my mind, but I know I can't keep living like this. I'm about to head downstairs one last time. I'll bring a better flashlight, maybe my phone's camera too, and see if I can document anything. If I find something that explains all this, great. If not, I might just pack up what little I own and leave this place behind. I'm tired of feeling like something is following me around, creeping through walls and whispering when the lights go out. Even if I'm imagining it, the stress is real. And if it isn't my imagination, then I have a bigger problem on my hands. Either way, I'm done losing sleep. I'm opening that door right now. If I don't come back upstairs any calmer, I'll figure out my next move. But I have to do this. I can spend another night jumping at shadows and whispering walls. Whatever's down there, I'm not going to let it keep me trapped in my own home. It's time to face it. Even if the only thing I find is more damp concrete and broken boxes, I'd rather know for sure than keep guessing. So, here I go. If I hear those voices again, at least they'll be ready. I'm heading down now. I just hope that when I come back up, I won't feel that thing breathing down my neck anymore. I moved into this cabin in the mountains to escape everything. I wanted a simple routine where I could wake up to fresh air and silence. That first night, I felt good. But the second night, I started noticing something different. Like there was someone out there watching me. I didn't have any proof, I just felt it. Then it began to show up more clearly, like a figure standing among the trees, when the light started to fade. Now my nights are nothing but tension, and my days aren't much better. I'm here because I thought I needed isolation. Now I'm not so sure. I arrived a few weeks ago. I remember shoving my bags inside, stacking up some logs near the fireplace, and double-checking every corner of the place. The cabin itself is small, just one main room with a kitchen area plus a bedroom to the side and a tiny bathroom. There's an old wood-burning stove in the middle of the living space, and I keep it going most of the day so I don't freeze. The windows are narrow and tall, and there's a thin porch that wraps around the front and one side. Beyond that, it's just snow and tall pines. The road is a single lane that goes down the mountain. In bad weather it can be impossible to drive, but there's part of the appeal. No noise from neighbors, no traffic, nothing but me and the wilderness. I spent the first couple of days settling in. I hauled in firewood, arranged my clothes, tested the small generator out back, and set up my laptop on the kitchen table. I planned to write or just think, maybe clear my head. During the day, everything was calm. I could hear the wind pushing through the trees, maybe the crunch of snow falling off the branches, stuff like that. At night, it got quieter, but I still felt okay. I locked the door, closed the curtains, and lit some candles. The first night was peaceful. On the second night around dusk, I was standing near the window. I was brewing coffee on the stove and waiting for it to finish. As I looked out, I saw something. I couldn't tell if it was a person or just a shape of a tree trunk in the distance, beyond the clearing closer to where the tree line thickens. My eyes adjusted and I thought I saw movement, slow like a shifting shadow. Then it froze. I felt a wave of unease in my stomach. My heart rate picked up a little. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I stepped away from the window, got my coffee, and tried to ignore it. Later that same evening I turned off all the lights inside and peeked out through a gap in the curtains. The sky was dark, the stars were out, but the moon was only a sliver, so it was pretty dim. I squinted and tried to see if there was anything out there. At first I didn't notice anything. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was a faint shape near one of the tall pines. It looked like a person's outline, but I couldn't see a face or any details. I watched it, and I swear it moved a few steps closer. My breathing got shallow. I had that cold sensation running up my back. I stayed there just staring, trying not to blink. Then I blinked anyway, and the figure seemed to move again, just a little bit forward. I backed away from the window. My mind was racing. I remember thinking I should go out there and yell at it or at least shine a flashlight. Instead, I just stood there like an idiot, trying to decide if I was imagining the whole thing. Eventually, I decided I had to check. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer, opened the front door, and stepped outside. The cold hit me hard, and I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight. Snow crunched under my boots. I scanned the trees, but there was nothing. The figure was gone. I walked around the cabin, shining the light in every direction. Nothing but trees and snow, no footprints, no sign of anyone. I went back inside and locked the door. That night, I barely slept. In the morning, I felt a little silly. I figured I must have been tired. Maybe the shadows played tricks on me. I went outside to gather more firewood, and that's when I saw the footprints. They were dark impressions in the snow and formed a circle around the cabin, about 20 or 30 feet from the walls. I walked closer to see if I could make them out clearly. They weren't animal tracks. They looked like boot prints, but bigger than mine. I followed them around and confirmed it was a perfect loop around the cabin. The snow was packed down a bit in those spots, like someone had walked carefully, one step at a time around my place. I felt my stomach tighten. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The mountains were silent except for a light wind. I took a few pictures on my phone, but the lighting was terrible, and I'm not a great photographer. I spent that day on edge. I tried to focus on simple tasks like cleaning the cabin or organizing my pantry. I checked my generator and tested the radio I brought for emergencies. At one point I stepped outside to get a good look at the tray line in broad daylight. Nothing seemed out of place. No movement, no shapes that looked like a person. Eventually the sun started to descend, and I felt my anxiety rising. I built up the fire, locked the doors, shut the curtains. I tried to keep myself busy with some writing on my laptop, but I kept glancing at the windows. When evening rolled around, I heard something outside. It sounded like snow crunching. It was faint but distinct, like slow, deliberate steps. I froze and listened. My breathing got heavier, and I gripped the edge of the table. The steps continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I got up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The darkness made it tough, but I saw a shape again, almost in the same spot as the night before. This time, it was definitely a person-like outline. It looked a bit hunched, or maybe it was just the angle. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached for the flashlight again, but before I turned it on, the figure stepped forward. My heart slammed against my chest. I couldn't see a face or clothes, just this dark form. I yanked the curtain shut. I told myself I had to be brave, but my hands trembled. I opened the door quickly and shined the flashlight toward the spot. Nothing. The space was empty. The trees stood still, except for a few branches swaying in the breeze. I was shaking more from nerves than the cold. I walked a few yards away from the porch, yelling, "Hello, who's there?" My voice sounded weaker than I expected. There was no reply. I circled around the cabin but didn't see anything. No fresh footprints, no movement, just my breath and the crunching snow under my boots. After a few minutes I went back inside, locked up, and tried not to panic. That night I slept with my flashlight in my hand. Every few hours I'd wake up thinking I heard something outside. Sometimes it was just the wind or the setting of the cabin's old beams. I dozed off around dawn, then woke up exhausted. The first thing I did was look outside. More footprints in the snow. The same circle reinforced with fresh prints. I checked carefully. The circle was the same distance from the cabin as before. My mind raced with questions. Who was doing this? Why? How were they vanishing like that? I felt a tightness in my chest. I considered packing up and leaving, but part of me refused to be driven out so quickly. Also, the roads weren't great after the last snowfall. Still, I kept thinking about leaving. I called a local ranger station. I told them someone was trespassing around my cabin at night. They asked if I saw the person up close. I said no. They said they'd send someone to check in the next day or so, but were short-staffed. I tried not to sound desperate, but I was rattled. I tried to keep my voice steady and just said, "I'm worried someone's messing with me." They took my information and said they'd be in touch. During the day, I busied myself with chores. I chopped some firewood behind the cabin, which took more energy than I expected. The cold air stung my lungs and my muscles started to ache. I was glad for a physical distraction, but every now and then I'd look over my shoulder expecting to see that figure again. The hours passed, and I felt uneasy the whole time. Around mid-afternoon, I walked out to where the circle of footprints was. I studied it, noticing the spacing of the steps. They were consistent, each stride about the same length. I tried to guess how tall the person might be or what kind of boots they were. The prints were vague, just dark depressions. The snow had some ice crystals in it, and I couldn't see a clear tread pattern, but the size definitely seemed larger than my foot. By late afternoon, I felt the tension creeping back. The daylight was fading, and I dreaded the moment the sun slipped behind the mountains. I cooked a quick meal on my small stove, just some canned stew I heated up. While I ate, I kept glancing at the windows. Outside, the sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep purple as the sun disappeared. My stomach started knotting up again. I switched on a lantern inside and made sure my flashlight had fresh batteries. Around the time it got fully dark, I heard that crunching sound again. I set my bowl down and went silent. The crunch was slow, a single step then another. My heart thudded. I felt my hands shaking. I stood up, grabbed the flashlight and walked quietly to the front door. My boots squeaked on the cabin floor. I unlocked the door, then paused. The crunching continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I yanked the door open and shone the light. The beam cut through the darkness, hitting the snow and the edges of the trees. Nothing. I took a few steps onto the porch, my breath coming in short bursts. The hair on my neck stood on end. I yelled, "I know you're out here." My voice came out shaky. Silence. No movement. I went back inside and slammed the door. My heart raced as I locked it again. This time I decided to sit near the window and watch. I turned off all the lights except for the small lantern behind me. I cracked the curtain just enough to look out. The forest was dark, and it took my eyes a while to adjust. After a few minutes I saw that shape again. It was closer this time, maybe within 30 yards. It stood still, facing me. My mouth went dry. I felt my pulse thumping in my head. I just stared at it, and it stared back. We stood there like that for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a minute or two. My hands got sweaty. I considered grabbing my phone but was afraid to look away. Then, as if sensing my intention, the figure seemed to crouch or move down. I blinked, and it was gone. I bolted up from my chair, nearly tripping over my own feet. I ran outside again with the flashlight, but I found nothing. No fresh prints, no sign of movement, just darkness and cold. I paced around the cabin for an hour, trying to calm down. My mind kept racing with questions. Why would someone do this? How are they vanishing so easily? I sat in my chair by the stove, listening for any sound. Sometimes I thought I heard scraping near the walls, but it could have been the wind. My body felt tense, like I was ready to jump at any noise. I kept the flashlight by my side, along with a fire poker, just in case. I stayed like that until the sky started to lighten. At dawn, I finally got up and went outside to check. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. Sure enough, the footprints were back, forming that perfect circle. I looked for any sign of different footprints leading away, but there was nothing. It was as if whoever made them had floated away. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I kicked at the snow, scattering some of the prints, then realized I might be destroying evidence. But frustration got the best of me. My breathing was shaky, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I just wanted it to stop. I haven't left the cabin yet. I'm still here waiting for someone from the ranger station to show up. Part of me wants to pack everything and drive out now. But there's a storm forecasted, and I don't know if the roads are passable. Besides, I keep thinking maybe I'm just panicking that it's some drifter or a weird neighbor I haven't met, and that I'll figure it out. But every night I see that shape outside. Every morning, those footprints are there again in a perfect circle. Right now, I'm sitting at the table. The sun is just setting, and I'm trying to prepare myself. I keep checking the windows, half expecting to see that form already. My back is tense, and my hands are restless. If I hear footsteps again, I don't know what I'll do. Part of me wants to run outside and chase whoever it is. Another part of me wants to huddle in the corner and pretend I'm not here. My stomach is twisted in knots. There's no peace, no inspiration, only this dread that's building inside me. I'm telling this story because I don't know what else to do. If anyone hears it, maybe they'll believe me. Maybe they'll have an explanation. All I know is that something or someone is out there, waiting for dusk. And when the sun goes down, it shows up, step by step, drawing closer to the cabin. Then by morning, it's gone, leaving those footprints in the snow. They're too perfect, too controlled. I can't explain it. I just know I'm not alone out here. And that's the last thing I expected when I moved into this cabin for peace and quiet. I've been hearing heavy footsteps in my attic every night at exactly 2 in the morning. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was dreaming or half awake. But then I listened more closely, and there was no mistaking that deliberate, steady thumping above my head. It put my nerves on high alert. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that old houses make weird noises. I told myself it was just the wood settling. But after hearing it for weeks, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Something was up there, and it walked around like it knew the place. I live alone in this old 2-story house. It belonged to my late uncle. When I moved in, I fixed some broken windows, repainted the walls, and changed a few doors. I never touched the attic. I never even looked inside until recently, because I didn't see the need. The door was always locked, and my uncle never left me a key. That felt odd, but I brushed it off. I had no reason to think anything important was stored up there. I honestly forgot about it after a while. A month ago, I started hearing the footsteps. They were distinct and always happened around the same time. I'd be asleep in my bedroom on the 2nd floor, and then I'd jolt awake. My heart would pound, and my ears would ring as I listened to that deliberate stomping. It sounded like heavy boots pacing back and forth. Sometimes it lasted a couple of minutes, sometimes half an hour, but it happened night after night, and I couldn't figure out what could be causing it. One night, I snapped. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and stood under the attic door in the hallway. I could still hear the steps overhead. I felt sweat running down the sides of my face. I remember my hand shaking as I reached for the attic doorknob. I turned it, and to my surprise, it opened right away. I had always assumed it was locked, but now it turned without resistance. My heart pounded even harder as I looked up into the darkness. I couldn't see much, just a few beams from my flashlight reflecting off dusty boards and old support beams. The air smelled stale like old cardboard. But the moment I stuck my head through the opening, the footsteps stopped. The attic went silent. I climbed the narrow wooden stairs, feeling them creak beneath my weight. My neck felt stiff because I was so tense. My flashlight beam swept over cobwebs and old trunks stacked against the far wall. I didn't see any living thing. No raccoons, no stray cats, nothing. I walked from one side of the attic to the other, ducking under a low beam, and all I found were dusty boxes and a few old suitcases. Then I spotted a large chest in the corner. It looked different from everything else. It was wrapped in thick chains, the kind you'd use to lock up a warehouse gate. A rusty padlock was attached to the chains, holding them tight around the chest. I walked closer, aiming my flashlight at it. The lid was made of dark wood, scarred with scratches and dents. The metal edges were tarnished and looked bent in some places. I felt a strange heaviness in the air as I stood there. I couldn't tell if it was my nerves getting the better of me or something else. There was a sudden chill that made the hair on my arms stand up. I reached out, but before I touched it, the chains rattled on their own and the lid shifted with a groaning sound. I jumped back so fast I nearly fell over. My mouth felt dry, and my heart hammered like it was trying to burst out of my chest. I ran down the attic stairs without looking back, switched on every light on the second floor, and sat in my living room until sunrise. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, I tried to push that night's memory out of my mind. I kept telling myself that maybe I'd bumped the chest or the floor causing the chains to move, but I couldn't quite believe it. Something was different about that attic. I started noticing a chill in the hallway beneath the attic door. Every time I walked by, I got goosebumps. Even if the rest of the house felt warm, the air under that door felt at least 10 days colder. It was unsettling. I also began having dreams. Sometimes I'd dream of a heavy presence standing next to my bed breathing. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, feeling like I wasn't alone in the room. For a while, I tried to stay away from the attic as much as possible. I blocked out the footsteps with music or headphones, but the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it seemed to get. I'd lie in bed at night, and at exactly 2 in the morning, I'd hear that pacing start up again. My stomach would tighten into a knot. My face would get hot, and my hands would clench the sheets. Then sometimes I'd hear a loud dragging sound, like something big was being moved across the floor up there. I'd lie awake until dawn, my heart racing, my eyes wide open, waiting for that awful noise to stop. After 2 weeks of barely sleeping, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to be chased out of my own house. The footsteps, the dreams, and the constant dread were taking a toll on me. My eyes had dark circles. My hands trembled when I tried to drink my coffee. I felt like a shell of myself. I finally made a plan. I was going to go back to the attic and open that chest if it killed me. I needed to know what was inside. The not knowing felt worse than anything else. On a Friday night, I set my alarm for 1:30, so I'd be awake before the footsteps started. I wanted to confront whatever was up there. I was tired of feeling scared. When the alarm beeped, I got up and put on a pair of jeans, a thick jacket, and some heavy boots. I took a flashlight again, along with a hammer and a crowbar. I didn't care if I broke the lock or damaged the chest. I just wanted answers. My hands were sweating as I climbed the attic steps. The wood creaked, and the darkness above felt too still. I clicked on my flashlight and the beam wobbled because my hand was shaking. I saw the chest right where it had been before. The chains looked the same, but I felt that strange chill in the air again. It stung my skin like I was standing in front of a freezer with the door open. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to walk towards the chest. Right when I got close, I heard the footsteps again. They seemed to echo all around me, even though I couldn't see anyone. It was like I could feel the vibrations under my boots. My heart pounded, and my breath came in short bursts. My instincts told me to run, but I pushed forward. I placed the flashlight on the floor next to me so I could see the chains. I took the hammer and swung at the padlock. The first hit bounced off, causing a loud clang. The second hit broke part of the lock's rusted edge. My pulse was racing so fast it felt like my head might burst. The footsteps grew louder behind me. I could have sworn I heard someone breathing right behind my ear. I ignored it and hammered away until the padlock cracked open. The chains slid off the chest with a metallic scrape, echoing across the attic. That sound made my skin prickle. I grabbed the lid and tried to lift it, but it felt like something was pushing back from the inside. I leaned my weight into it and forced it open a few inches. The hinges squeaked, and I thought I felt a rush of cold air come out. I tried to open it more, but the footsteps stopped abruptly, and I froze. Something about that silence felt worse than the noise. My mind started screaming at me to leave. I let go of the lid, stepped back, and almost tripped over a stack of old newspapers. I could see that the chest was open a crack. I couldn't see inside though. It was too dark, and the angle was too low. I took a deep breath and moved forward again. My whole body shook, and I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I reached for the lid, ready to open it all the way. Then the chest slammed shut on its own, making the loudest crash I've ever heard in that attic. My flashlight flickered and went out. I didn't know if the batteries died or if I dropped it. I stumbled, trying to keep my balance in the pitch-black attic. My lungs felt like they couldn't get enough air. I couldn't see a thing, and my ears rang from the sound of the chest closing. I scrambled towards where I thought the attic stairs were. My shoulder crashed into a wooden beam. I cursed under my breath, reached out, and found the top of the stairs. I practically threw myself down them, feeling each step jolt my knees. I didn't stop until I was back in the hallway. I slammed the attic door shut and locked it. Then I ran to my bedroom and locked that door too. I collapsed on my bed, breathing so hard I thought my chest might burst. My hands were shaking, and my heart felt like it wouldn't slow down. I stayed awake until morning light came through the windows. I kept expecting to hear the footsteps again, but there was only silence. The next day, I avoided the attic like the plague. I didn't want to think about the chest or what happened up there. I just focused on daily tasks. I went to the grocery store, picked up some supplies, and tried to distract myself by organizing my living room shelves. But I felt that chill again in the hallway, even with the attic door shut. It raised goosebumps on my arms, and I noticed the lights flickering a bit whenever I passed by. My stomach churned. I felt a tightness in my throat that wouldn't go away. That same night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the image of the chest lid slamming shut, the heavy footsteps, and the way the air felt electric with tension up there. My gut twisted at the thought of going back, but part of me felt drawn to it. I hated that feeling. It was like a tug in my mind, a constant whisper that wouldn't shut up. I tossed and turned, trying to push it out of my head, but the whisper grew stronger, telling me to go back, telling me to open the chest all the way, telling me that I needed to see what was inside. Around 2 hours in the morning, I heard a faint scratching noise above me. It was soft, but insistent. It lasted a few minutes, then stopped. I broke out in a cold sweat. My body tensed from head to toe. I pulled the covers over myself like that would protect me from whatever was happening in the attic. I lay there until the first hints of daylight started creeping through my curtains. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it all, but I had no logical explanation. I considered calling a friend or neighbor, asking them to help me, but I worried they'd think I was crazy. I didn't want to be the guy who freaks out over old house noises, especially if there was some normal explanation. But I knew there wasn't anything normal about that chest or those footsteps. Every time I walked by the attic door, I felt a pull. It was like my mind was being nudged to go back upstairs and finish what I started. It gave me chills in the middle of the afternoon. I'd be sitting on my couch watching TV and I'd catch myself glancing at the ceiling, picturing that chest waiting up there with its lid sealed shut. I felt my heart rate spike just thinking about it. Finally, I made a decision. I would barricade the attic door and pretend none of this ever happened. I'd go to the hardware store, buy the strongest locks and bolts, and seal that door shut. I didn't care if I never went up there again. So I drove to the store, bought a steel latch and a couple of heavy-duty locks, then came home ready to secure the door. But the moment I touched the attic door, something felt wrong. The door felt colder than usual. My palms got clammy, and my breath came out in quick gasps. It was like my body was rejecting what I was about to do, but I steadied my hands and started drilling. I could hear my own breath echoing in the hallway. I forced the screws in place and attached the latch. When I finished, I tested it by pulling the knob. The door barely budged. I felt a moment of relief. Then I heard a loud thud from inside the attic, like something heavy hitting the floor. The vibration shook the door against my hand. I turned and bolted down the stairs. I spent the rest of the day trying not to think about it, but I felt tension coiling in my stomach. The house felt suffocating. That evening, I tried to watch a movie in the living room, but I couldn't focus. Every noise in the house made me jump. The pipes, the wind against the windows, everything felt like a sign that something was trying to get my attention. Around midnight, I heard a soft scraping at the attic door. I had locked it with everything I had, but something was on the other side. It scraped for a few seconds, paused, then did it again. I sat there on the couch, my hands trembling, staring at the ceiling, imagining those chains rattling or that lid shifting on its own. My chest felt tight and my breathing quickened. Right now I still hear it. I'm sitting here telling you all of this because I don't know what else to do. The door is locked, and I don't plan on going up there again, but I can't ignore that feeling that keeps gnawing at me. It's like the chest wants to be opened, like it's calling me. I feel it in my bones. My back is tense, and my shoulders ache. I haven't slept properly in days. I'm stuck between two choices. I can open that chest all the way and find out what's inside, or I can keep trying to seal it off and ignore the footsteps, the scratches, and the strange cold spots. Right now, I'm leaning towards sealing it off, but I don't know how long I can hold out. My body feels pulled in two directions. I'm afraid that if I give in, I'll discover something I'll never be able to forget, and if I don't, I'll never have any peace. That's the truth. I don't have a dramatic ending or a big conclusion. I only know that the chest is still up there, and it's been calling me every night around the same time. The house is quiet for the moment, but I know the footsteps will start again soon. My mouth feels dry and my pulse is racing even as I speak. I keep the hallway light on. I keep telling myself I'll be fine if I stay downstairs, if I keep distracting myself. But every minute I feel a slow, heavy pull that drags my thoughts back to that attic. I'm afraid to open it, and I'm afraid not to. That's all I've got. I'll probably sit here until the sun comes up again, listening, waiting, trying to pretend the noise isn't there. But I know it will come. The steps will return, and that chest won't stay quiet forever. The figure had a humanoid shape, but its eyes were huge and carved with weird grooves around them. I felt a jolt of unease when I first touched it. My fingers tingled, and a burst of warmth spread through my palm. I bought it without thinking too much. The price was low, and the old man behind the counter looked eager to get rid of it. I left with the statue wrapped in newspaper, ignoring the odd sense of dread clinging to the back of my mind. I took it home that evening. I lived by myself in a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of an older building. The place has thin walls and creaky wooden floors. The hallway always smells like stale coffee from my neighbor's kitchen. But that day I thought I smelled something like charred wood. I blamed my imagination. I carried the statue inside and placed it on the side table next to my couch. I immediately noticed a change in the apartment's atmosphere. The air felt heavier, as if there was no good ventilation, even though my windows were open. I walked around the living room, looked at the statue again, and wiped some dust off it with a rag. The stone seemed to get warmer under my hand, almost as if it had its own source of heat. I felt sweat breaking out of my forehead. My shirt stuck to my back. The first night with the statue was rough. I had a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I heard a voice talking in some language I couldn't understand. The words sounded sharp and repetitive. There was also a grinding sound, like stone scraping on stone. It was more than a sound, though. I felt vibrations in my skull. I woke up gasping for air. My hands were shaking and my heart hammered against my chest. The room smelled like hot ash, reminding me of the aftermath of a campfire but with a bitter edge. When I turned on the lamp, I saw faint dark rings on the floor. They were small, scattered near the foot of my bed like someone had traced circles with black charcoal. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My first thought was that I must have stepped in something outside, some kind of tar. But the circles were too perfect, almost like burns. I checked the sole of my feet. Nothing. I checked my bed for any debris. Everything looked normal, except for those strange marks on the floor. I felt a shiver shoot down my spine. My arms prickled with goosebumps. I tried to convince myself that maybe I spilled something, or tracked in some residue. I turned off the light and tried to go back to sleep. But it was hard. My mind kept replaying that voice. Those words I couldn't understand, and the scraping sound that made my teeth clench. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. My shoulders were tense and my head pounded. I walked around the bed and looked at the spots on the floor. They were still there, slightly darker than the wood. I tried scrubbing them with a damp cloth, but they wouldn't fade. They didn't smell like anything now, just burned wood. I left them alone and headed for the kitchen to make coffee. I felt uneasy, like I hadn't rested at all. I had to go to work, so I tried to put everything out of my mind. I took a quick shower, got dressed, and locked the apartment. All day at the office, I found myself zoning out. My boss asked me a question about a project, and I had no idea what he'd said. At one point, I caught myself tapping my pen in a weird pattern. It had a rhythm that matched the repeated phrases I'd heard in my dream. That realization made me drop the pen. I sat there staring at the desk, feeling my chest tighten. When I got home that evening, I noticed a lingering warmth in the apartment. It was hotter inside than outside, even though I'd left the windows cracked for ventilation. I walked over to the side table and looked at the statue. The carved eyes seemed to glare at me with more intensity than before. My throat went dry. I thought about throwing it away right then, but I hesitated. I told myself it was just a weird rock, nothing more. That night, the nightmares came back. The same voice chanted those unknown phrases. I felt the words rattling through my chest. My limbs felt heavy, and I couldn't move in the dream. The scraping sound of stone grinding against stone grew louder. It filled my ears, making me grit my teeth until my jaw hurt. I woke up drenched in sweat. my heart racing. The sheets were damp and the entire bedroom smelled like ash. I sat up, breathing hard, and fumbled for the lamp switch. I saw more dark marks on the floor. Now there were several clusters of small circles, each ring about an inch or two in diameter. My stomach lurched. My head spun with panic. I got out of bed and paced around the room. Every step felt unsteady. My mouth felt dry. I splashed water on my face in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked bloodshot and my skin was clammy. I tried to calm down, but it was impossible. I kept thinking about the voice, the heat, and the statue. I went back to the living room. The statue was exactly where I'd left it. I walked over, picked it up, and held it under the light. The rock felt warm in my hand. The detailed grooves around the eyes seemed deeper. I rotated it to see if there was any inscription on the base, but I didn't find anything except more rough stone. I set it down, grabbed a garbage bag from the kitchen, and stuffed the statue inside. My plan was to throw it in the dumpster behind my building, but when I opened the front door, I felt a blast of hot air hit me from inside my own apartment. The hallway was normal, but behind me the living room felt like a furnace. My shirt clung to my body again. I pushed through that heat, walked to the dumpster in the alley, and tossed the bag in. My throat burned as I took a breath, like I'd been inhaling scorched air. When I returned to the apartment, the place still felt warm, but less oppressive. I opened all the windows and let the night air circulate. I paced around for a while, too jittery to sit. Then I sat on the couch and scrolled through my phone, looking for distractions. Nothing helped. Around midnight I went to bed. I stared at the ceiling for an hour before drifting off. Sometime later, I jolted awake. My phone said it was 3. The heat was back, worse than before. I tossed the blankets aside. My t-shirt was soaked with sweat. I swung my legs off the bed and merely tripped on something near the doorway. The lights were off, but I could see a shape on the floor, something small and dark. I felt a surge of dread. I turned on the bedside lamp. The statue was there, lying on its side. The newspaper wrapping was gone, and a smell of burnt paper hung in the air. My hand started to shake. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I couldn't move for a few seconds. Then I crouched down and reached for the statue. It was hot to the touch, like a rock that had been sitting in the sun. I forced myself to pick it up. My mind raced. I knew I'd thrown it away. There was no way it could have come back on its own. I felt the urge to drop it and run out of the apartment, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were stuck in place. I left the bedroom and walked to the living room, holding the statue in my trembling hand. The dark circles on the floor had spread, forming odd patterns across the wooden boards. I didn't hear any voices at that moment, but the thick silence felt worse than noise. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. I closed my eyes for a second and tried to steady myself. I decided I had to do more than just toss it in the trash. I grabbed an old towel, wrapped the statue in it, and shoved it into a plastic grocery bag. I grabbed my keys, threw on a pair of jeans and a jacket, and left the apartment. The stairwell was empty, and the sound of my footsteps echoed against the walls. Outside, the night air felt crisp against my sweaty skin. I headed straight for my car. I drove out of the city, trying to find some remote place to get rid of it. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every time I glanced at the passenger seat, I half expected the statue to be uncovered and staring at me. But it stayed in the bag. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, feeling paranoid even though there was nothing behind me. After about an hour of driving, I found a stretch of road with an overpass and a shallow creek below. I pulled over. My heart pounded as I got out of the car and grabbed the bag. I climbed down the embankment, nearly losing my footing on the loose dirt. When I reached the water, I waded into the creek. The cold water soaked my shoes. I tossed the bag into the current and watched it float away. A wave of relief hit me, and my shoulders relaxed a bit. I returned home as dawn started to light the sky. My body ached with exhaustion, but the apartment felt different when I stepped inside. It was cooler, almost normal. I shut the door, locked it, and sat down on the couch. I tried to let the tension out of my muscles. Soon I stumbled into bed and fell asleep without dreams. For the rest of that day I felt shaky but hopeful. I cleaned the apartment. I opened all the windows to let fresh air in. I inspected every inch of the floor. The burn marks remained, but at least there weren't any new ones. The stench of ash had faded. I spent the afternoon doing mundane tasks. Laundry, dishes, vacuuming, anything to keep my mind off the statue. Night came again, and I started to get anxious. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I kept waiting for that scraping noise or the strange voice, but they never came. I dozed off around midnight and slept through without interruption. When I woke up, I felt more rested than I had in days. My back still hurt, but that deep sense of dread was gone. I went to work feeling cautious but relieved. I got through the day without any major incidents, no nightmares, no weird moments of zoning out. When I got home, I checked the living room again. The side table was empty. There were no signs of the statue. I exhaled a long breath and felt a slight smile on my face for the first time in a while. For the next few days, I kept expecting the statue to show up again. Every morning I checked under my bed, behind the couch, and in the closet. I stayed on edge, but nothing happened. The apartment remained at a normal temperature, and the faint ash smell eventually disappeared. The dark circles on the floor never went away completely, but I got used to them and they didn't spread any further. I started sleeping better, even though I still woke up sometimes with my heart racing from the memory of those dreams. One afternoon, I went back to that antique shop. I wanted to talk to the owner and ask if he knew anything about the statue, but the place was closed, with the windows boarded up. A sign on the door said it was out of business. I peered through the gap in the boards, but it was too dark to see inside. I lingered for a moment, feeling uneasy. Then I left. It's been a few weeks now. I haven't had another nightmare. My apartment feels normal again, though I still see those burnt circles whenever I look down at the floor. I've thought about trying to refinish the wood, but part of me doesn't want to tamper with them. It's worried it might stir something up. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's how I feel. I haven't heard the voice or the scraping sounds in my head. My sleep is peaceful, and sometimes I wake up sweating and remember the heat that statue radiated, only to realize I'm just under too many blankets. I don't know if that thing is really gone, or if it's just waiting somewhere. But for now, my life is back to routine. Work is stressful. My apartment is small, and my neighbor still makes terrible coffee that seeps into the hallway. But I'm glad to deal with those normal problems instead of the nightmares. When I think about the statue, my hands tense up, and I feel my heart rate spike. I picture those huge carved eyes, and the way the stone felt alive in my grip. I can't explain any of it. I don't try to. It doesn't feel like a story I can share casually with friends or coworkers. They'd probably laugh it off, or worse, believe me and freak out. I keep it to myself. Sometimes at night, I still get up to check the living room just to be sure. I look at the empty side table and run my foot across the floor, feeling the old burn marks under my toes. Then I breathe in and go back to bed, reminding myself that it's over. At least for now, I'm free of that thing. I can't forget it though. I still remember the weight of the statue in my hand and that scorching sensation creeping up my arm. I remember the grinding noise in my dreams, the voice chanting words that made no sense. I remember the smell of ashes filling my bedroom. But I also remember the relief I felt when I watched the statue float away in that creek. That's enough to help me sleep. Even if a small part of me keeps waiting for another knock on the inside of my bedroom wall or another burn mark on the floor, if that day comes, I'll deal with it then. For now, I'm okay. That's all that matters. I thought I was buying a quiet place where I could spend weekends away from city noise. I wasn't planning on finding something that would keep me up at night. But here I am, sitting in my new living room, still feeling that knot in my stomach every time I remember the sound of those chains. I moved into this house a week ago. It's a small country property, about 2 acres of land with an old barn and a cluster of tall trees that block most of the sunlight in the morning. The house itself is a single-story structure with peeling paint on the outside walls. The roof looks decent enough, and the inspector said the foundation is solid. It's surrounded by uneven ground, patches of grass, and a bunch of weeds that look like they haven't been cut in years. There's a small dirt path from the main road to my front porch, lined by wild bushes. Everything seemed ordinary enough at first. On my second day, I decided to explore more of the land. Behind the barn, there's a slight slope. It leads to a clustered area of trees that grow close to each other, forming a sort of natural barrier. I pushed through the branches, felt the crunch of dead leaves under my boots, and tried not to trip on any exposed roots. As I walked deeper into this overgrown area, I noticed an old circular structure on the ground. It was covered by wooden boards and secured by 2 heavy chains. I knelt down, brushed off some of the dirt and leaves, and realized it was a well. The wood was damp and covered in moss on its edges. The chains looked rusted, but still sturdy enough. They were arranged in a cross shape, preventing the boards from moving around. It all looked like something from a place nobody had visited in decades. That same day, I decided not to mess with the well. I figured I'd check it out later, maybe shine a flashlight inside to see how deep it is. In the meantime, I focused on settling into the house, organizing my furniture and cleaning the kitchen. Nothing felt strange then. I just saw the well as a curiosity, a piece of the old property that might need sealing for safety reasons. That night, though, I was jolted awake around midnight. I heard a metallic scraping sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the wind chimes I'd hung outside, but the noise was too harsh, like something dragging. I got out of bed, put on a pair of sweatpants, and opened the front door. The night was cool and the grass was wet from the day's drizzle. I listened carefully. The sound seemed to be coming from behind the barn. It reminded me of chains sliding against wood or stone. My chest felt tight, but I told myself it was probably an animal that stumbled onto something. I grabbed a flashlight, walked around the barn, and headed in the direction of the well. As I got closer, the scraping stopped. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was expecting to see some raccoon or stray dog, but everything was still. I aimed the flashlight at the well. The boards looked just as I had left them. The chains were in place. I stood there for a minute or two, holding my breath and feeling my heart thump. There was no sound, only the rustle of leaves as a light breeze passed. Finally, I decided that maybe I had been hearing things. I went back to bed, but it took me a while to fall asleep. The next morning, I had a nagging feeling that something was off. I'm usually not easily spooked, but that sound kept replaying in my head. After breakfast, I returned to the well, checking for any signs of tampering. The boards were damp, but intact. The chains were still arranged in the same cross pattern, and the padlock on them looked old but untouched. I leaned my ear closer, hearing nothing but silence. Still, I felt uneasy. I tried tugging on the chain a bit. It gave a small rattle and a few flakes of rust fell off. Then I walked away, thinking I was getting paranoid. That evening, I tried to keep my mind off the well. I poured a beer, watched some TV, and listened to the crickets outside. The air felt heavy. Around 11, I decided to turn in. I lay in bed with my window cracked open to let in some fresh air. For a while, I only heard normal night sounds, the occasional hoot of an owl, a breeze through the trees. Then, close to midnight, the metallic scrape started again. This time, it sounded more insistent, like something was being dragged across a rough surface. My heart pounded. I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself to check it out. If I didn't, I'd never sleep. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my boots, and quietly made my way around the barn again. I felt a weird tension in my chest. Each step I took on the wet grass felt heavier than the last. The sound was still there, more distinct now. It was coming from the well. It was the sound of chains. It wasn't random, it had a kind of pattern, like something was trying to loosen them. When I turned the flashlight on the well, the sound stopped. I hurried closer, shining the beam over the boards. I saw the chain resting in the same position as before. Nothing looked disturbed, yet my stomach twisted in knots. I stood there, scanning the area, shining the light all around me. I didn't see any tracks in the mud. No sign of a trespasser or animal. The chain was still locked, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been moving it. The moment I stepped back from the well, I heard a faint dragging sound again, like the chain was being pulled from below. That was enough for me. I rushed back to the house, locked all the doors, and sat on the couch trying to calm down. My arms trembled, and my breathing was shallow. I must have stayed like that for an hour before I managed to go back to bed. By the next morning, I felt drained. I was torn between ignoring this and taking a closer look. My curiosity grew, but so did my unease. I stepped outside into the weak morning light. Dew covered the grass, and a slight chill was in the air. I forced myself to return to the well. I wanted to see if any boards had been moved overnight. When I got there, they were still in place, the chain unbroken. My hands shook when I tried to lift one of the boards, so I stopped. Something in me wanted to tear away the boards and peer inside, but I also felt a deep, crawling fear at the thought. I left it alone. I spent the day trying to distract myself with chores. I cleaned out the barn, throwing away piles of old straw and broken tools. I swept the floors and tried to open some windows to let in fresh air, but the frames were warped from years of neglect. I took a few breaks to drink water and wipe the sweat off my forehead. Each time I paused, I felt a pull at the back of my mind telling me to go check the well. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Around mid-afternoon, I gave in and walked out there again. I circled it a couple of times, looking at it from every angle. The boards had gaps between them, and I could see darkness below. My pulse sped up. I fiddled with the padlock, noticed how the metal was cold against my fingertips. I realized I was breathing harder, so I forced myself to step away. That night, it happened again. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard those chains. This time it sounded like they were clanking against the side of the well. I felt a jolt of adrenaline shoot through my body. My mouth went dry and my hands started to sweat. I got up and grabbed the flashlight. My foot slipped on the floor because I was moving too fast and I almost fell. I forced myself to slow down and step outside carefully. The air was still and the moon was out, casting weak light over the yard. As I crept around the barn, the chain noise got louder, more rhythmic. I flicked on my flashlight, pointed it at the well, and approached. Once I was within a few feet, the noise stopped again. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. My flashlight beam shook because my hand wouldn't stay steady. I approached the boards, gripping the flashlight with one hand. I bent down, trying to peer through one of the gaps. I saw a slick wall of stone dripping with water in some spots. I aimed the beam downward and it lit up the inside for a few feet, revealing a curve of damp, slimy rock. Beyond that, just blackness. The smell coming out of the gap was musty and stale. My scalp tingled and I felt goosebumps all over my arms. I kept thinking something might burst out or grab my arm. Nothing happened, but as I stood up I heard a soft clink, like the chain was shifting below. I ran back to the house, heart pounding. I didn't sleep well. My dreams were filled with the sound of chains rattling, boards creaking, and the sensation that something was right behind me. When morning came, I tried to tell myself I was just letting my imagination run wild. I even considered calling a friend to come visit, but I felt stupid trying to explain what was happening. Instead, I tried to stay busy again. I made a list of repairs, fix the broken fence post near the gate, replace a loose step on the porch, and check the wiring in the kitchen. I worked steadily, but my mind kept drifting back to the well. By late afternoon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I picked up a crowbar from the barn. My hands were sweating so badly that I had to wipe them on my jeans. My heartbeat thudded against my ears as I marched toward the well. My gut felt heavy, like I was about to do something dangerous. When I arrived, I stood there for a moment, staring at the boards. The urge to pry them off was so strong that I felt my arms tense up, but fear made me hesitate. I laid the crowbar across my lap and just sat on a nearby rock. The day was quiet. I heard birds in the distance, felt a mild breeze brush against my face. The boards and chains sat there, worn and wet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were just waiting for me to do something, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My hands shook, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Finally, I walked away. That night, I locked my doors and tried to watch a movie to keep my mind off things. The well was all I could think about. I dreaded the moment when the clock struck midnight. Sure enough, at around that time, the scraping noise returned, as if on schedule. I gripped the arm of my chair, feeling my chest tighten. I considered ignoring it, but the sound got more intense. My eyes watered from the stress. My breathing became shallow. Eventually, I had to see if the boards were moving. I grabbed the flashlight again and tossed on my jacket before going outside. The grass felt cold and slick under my boots. My flashlight illuminated the barn's broken siding and the wet path leading to the well. Each step sent a pulse of dread through my body. As I approached, the sound died down to a faint rattle, then complete silence. The air felt thick. I leaned over the well edge again, shining my flashlight down through a gap in the boards. My heart pounded against my ribs. I didn't see anything but stone walls. I heard slow dripping from somewhere below. My hands shook so much that the beam jumped around. Suddenly, I heard the chain tighten. It wasn't a loud clang, but I felt it vibrate. I stumbled back, almost dropping my flashlight. I backed away, step by step, staring at that well, convinced something was about to push its way out. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room, all the lights on, with a crowbar by my side. The house felt cold, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I tried to tell myself I was safe, that nothing could climb out as long as the boards and chains were there, but I couldn't shake the urge to remove them. It was like something in the back of my mind was whispering that I needed to see what was down there. My throat felt dry, and my eyes kept darting to the windows. I didn't rest until the first light of dawn. Now it's next afternoon. I'm writing this down because I feel like I'm losing my grip. I keep pacing around, looking at that crowbar, then glancing out the window at the barn. I can almost see the path to the well in my peripheral vision. My stomach churns every time I think about it. I know I shouldn't remove the boards. That sound of chains dragging around is enough to make me want to board up that entire section of the land. But part of me needs to know if there's something tangible inside. Maybe it's some old machinery, or a broken pump shifting with the water. But the noises feel too deliberate. They always stop the moment I get too close. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. Each night the noises have gotten louder. Each morning the well looks the same, still sealed up. I'm torn between ripping it open to put an end to my questions or leaving it alone and living with the unease. This is supposed to be my escape from city stress, but I'm more anxious here than I ever was in my old apartment. I jump at every little noise now. When the wind picks up, I tense, thinking it's those chains again. At this point, I'm exhausted. My body feels worn out from lack of decent sleep. My eyes are puffy, and I feel a constant headache creeping in. Still, I can't leave this alone. It's like the well is calling me. Every time I walk near the barn, I feel that pull. My hands start sweating and my heart rate goes up. I keep looking at the boards, imagining myself prying them off one by one. Then I picture shining my flashlight down into the darkness and seeing something move. That thought makes my stomach lurch. I don't have a plan. Maybe I'll try to chain it more securely at another layer of boards or pour concrete over it. But what if I do that, and the noises never stop? What if I make it angry? Whatever it is. I catch myself thinking thoughts like that and realize I'm starting to sound irrational. But fear does that to a person. Tonight, we'll try to stay inside. No matter what I hear, I won't go out there. You'll crank up the TV, maybe play some music. If the sounds get too loud to ignore, I'll just cover my ears. I'm not sure how sustainable that is, but I don't have another solution right now. I don't want to leave this house yet. I put too much time and money into moving here. It's just that I didn't expect a well to throw my life into chaos. I'm sitting here finishing this account feeling that tingling sensation in my arms. My neck is stiff. My pulse is elevated. I can tell if it's because I'm reliving the nightly scares, or because the sun is going down and I know it's coming. The evening light is shifting, making the interior of the house look darker. The windows are turning into black mirrors. Soon it'll be midnight and I'll hear those chains again. I'm trying to stay calm, but my breathing is shallow, and my nerves are on edge. I keep asking myself if I can handle hearing the chains one more time. Can I stay away from the well? Or will I give in to that urge to tear the boards off? I hate feeling so torn. My hands are shaking as I type this. I feel sweat on my forehead and my throat is tight. I'm not sure how long I can resist that pull, but I also know I'm too afraid to actually do it. This is my life now. Me, this old country house, and that damned well out back. I never asked for this. I never expected that a simple piece of land would carry such a weight. But here I am, stuck with this creeping dread every single night as evening falls once again, and I feel the tension building in my chest. Any minute now I'll hear the first scrape of metal, and my heart will start racing like it does every time. I don't know where this is headed. I just know that well isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. It started with a quick glance at my bathroom mirror last week. I was getting ready for work and caught sight of my reflection. At first I didn't notice anything strange. I saw my face, a tired expression, and a bit of stubble. Then I noticed a slight delay. When I moved my hand, my reflection moved a fraction of a second later. It wasn't major, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I wiped my eyes and tried to convince myself it was just morning fatigue. I left the mirror alone and went to the kitchen. I remember putting bread in the toaster and feeling uneasy. The rest of the day felt normal until I got home late. I stepped into my apartment and turned on the lights. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I went to the bathroom to wash my face. I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to see if there was any delay again. Everything looked fine at first. Then I noticed my right arm move a bit slower in the reflection, like a short lag. My heart pounded. and my scalp felt tight. I stood there for a moment, breathing through my nose. I left the bathroom, flipped off the light, and sat on my couch. That night I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured my reflection. I kept imagining it lagging behind, moving after I did. Around midnight, I decided to get up for some water. I walked to the kitchen and spotted my reflection in the dark window above the sink. The lights in the kitchen were off, so I only saw a faint outline. But I swear I saw a second silhouette right behind me, taller and blurred, staring at the back of my head. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, gripping the counter. There was nobody there. I felt a chill run through my arms. The hair on my neck stood up. I backed away from the window. I didn't go back to sleep that night. In the morning, I tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. I took a shower, avoiding looking at the bathroom mirror as much as possible. My chest felt tight, and I kept clearing my throat as if I had something stuck there. Well, I got dressed without glancing at any reflective surface. Then, in the hallway, I passed a small decorative mirror. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shape behind me, but it disappeared when I turned my head. My heart started racing again. I tried to keep walking, pretending I was just tired or imagining things. At work, I felt a sense of relief because there are fewer mirrors in my office. I focused on my computer screen. I kept telling myself I was just paranoid. Around lunchtime, I went to the restroom. As soon as I walked in, I realized I had to face a large mirror above the row of sinks. My reflection seemed normal until I leaned forward to wash my hands. Then, I heard a whisper. It sounded like my name spoken by somebody very close to my ear. My heart thumped in my chest. I froze with my hands under the faucet. The water kept running, but I didn't move. I stared straight at the sink, afraid to look into the mirror. I could feel my pulse in my temples. Finally, I forced myself to shut off the water and look up. The reflection was just me, but my face looked pale and my eyes were wide. I dried my hands and rushed out of there. That afternoon, I couldn't concentrate on my tasks. My legs felt jittery, and my mouth was dry. I stayed late to avoid heading home. Eventually, I had no choice but to leave. The bus ride back felt long, and I avoided looking at the windows. I just kept my eyes on the floor. When I got to my stop, I walked straight to my apartment building and took the stairs. I didn't want to be stuck in the elevator, surrounded by reflective doors. Inside my place, I locked the door and exhaled. For a few seconds, I just stood there feeling my chest tighten again. I turned on every light in the apartment. Then I took a seat on the couch, focusing on the blank TV screen across from me. It showed a faint reflection of the room. I got that same uneasy feeling like I wasn't alone. I heard a low whisper by my left ear. It said my name, drawn out and slow. I jumped up and almost dropped the remote. I looked around, but there was nothing. I tried to calm down. My hands were shaking, and my throat felt constricted. I stepped toward the TV, turned it on, and scrolled through channels just for background noise. I made myself a simple dinner, just noodles and some leftover chicken in the fridge. I ate while standing in the kitchen, keeping my eyes away from the window. My appetite was small, but I forced down some bites. Then I washed the dishes. My reflection in the stainless steel faucet caught my eye. It looked like my face was further back than it should have been, like it was receding into darkness. I blinked hard, and it seemed to return to normal. My heart hammered. I dried my hands and retreated to the living room. I tried to pass the time by checking my phone. I scrolled through messages and random apps. My mind kept drifting to that delayed reflection. I looked around my apartment, realizing I have a few random reflective surfaces. The TV screen, a picture frame with glossy glass, the microwave door, and of course the bathroom mirror. Each one felt like it was waiting for me to catch a glimpse. I decided to cover the bathroom mirror with a towel and threw a sheet over the large mirror in the hallway. This made me feel a little calmer, at least for a moment. I decided to go to bed early, leaving every light on, which felt strange, but I couldn't stand the darkness. I slid under the covers fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. I kept hearing small noises like the floorboards creaking or the pipes humming. My breathing was shallow, and my heart wouldn't settle. After about an hour, I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a cold, tingling sensation on my right arm. I realized I had fallen asleep with the lights on. The entire room looked bright and harsh. I blinked a few times, my eyes burned. I tried to shift my position, then I heard it again. my name in a low hiss right next to me. My chest tightened. I glanced around the room, but there was no one there. I stood up, feeling unsteady on my feet. My head pounded. I thought about leaving the apartment and staying at a hotel, but it was late, and I wasn't sure if that would help. In the morning, I checked my phone to see if I could schedule an appointment with a doctor or maybe a therapist. I felt embarrassed describing the situation, so I just said I was having severe anxiety. The receptionist said they could fit me in at the end of the week. That left me with several more days to deal with this. I left the apartment for work, making sure to keep my eyes on the ground. On the sidewalk, I passed shop windows, but I didn't look at them. I just hurried along, feeling sweat collect under my armpits. I almost collided with a stranger because I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. At work, I considered telling someone. I wondered if a coworker would think I'm crazy. I sat at my desk, tapping my foot rapidly. I avoided the restroom mirror by using the stall quickly and washing my hands in a sink at the corner, looking down the whole time. I listened for whispers, but I only heard the usual humming lights and the squeak of shoes on the tile. When I got back to my desk, my boss asked if I'm all right. I said I just feel tired. He told me to get some rest. I nodded, but didn't offer more details. I made it through the day and went home. My nerves were on edge again when I stepped back into my apartment. I locked the door behind me. The towels over the mirrors were still in place. The bright overhead light showed me the living room just as I left it. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. Then I noticed the microwave door open. The reflection on that black glass showed me standing there and behind me. I saw the outline of that shape again. It was bigger than before, and it looked closer to my shoulders. My chest seized up. I spun around. Nothing. I pressed my hands to my face, rubbing my eyes. I felt dizzy. I clutched the counter, trying to breathe. I realized I needed to calm down or I'd end up running outside in a panic. I went to the living room and switched on the TV to distract myself. I sat there for hours, flipping through channels without focusing on anything. Around 10 at night, I shut the TV off. I stared at the dark screen. My reflection looked back at me. This time my face was normal, but behind it was a dark shape. I leaned forward. The shape seemed to tilt its head to one side, like it was studying me. I felt my entire body tense. I jumped to my feet and whipped around. Empty room. I turned back. The shape was gone. My heart was beating so hard that I felt a throb in my neck. I decided I couldn't just keep sitting there. I grabbed some duct tape from a drawer and started covering every reflective surface I could find. I covered the TV screen, the microwave door, the picture frames, and even the small section of shiny metal on the kitchen faucet. I double-checked that the mirrors were still covered. By the time I finished, the apartment looked ridiculous, but at least I couldn't see any reflections. I leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, feeling a slight relief. I still heard whispers from time to time. It was always my name, drawn out and quiet. I tried to ignore them. I listened to music through my headphones to drown everything out. I managed to eat a little bit of food. Then I sat on the couch feeling exhausted, but too nervous to sleep. My body ached from tension. My neck felt stiff. My shoulders were sore. I kept cracking my knuckles and shaking my legs. I noticed my phone had a slight reflection on the screen when it was off, so I turned it on and set the brightness to max, just to avoid seeing that black surface. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, it was early morning. The sun was coming through the windows, which were also reflective to some degree, but I tried not to look at them. I grabbed my jacket and left. I couldn't handle the apartment anymore. I walked around the block, keeping my eyes down. I passed a few storefronts with glass windows. Out of habit, I looked at one. My reflection was there, and behind me, in plain daylight, I saw that shadowy figure. My stomach lurched. I staggered back, nearly falling. A passerby asked if I was okay. I mumbled something and hurried off. When I got back home, I realized I had to keep living with this until I could see a professional. I felt a spike of anger. I wanted to tear down every mirror and smash every piece of glass. But I also felt fear that maybe it wouldn't matter. I drank some water and paced around. I kept hearing faint whispers that made my skin crawl. Sometimes I felt a cold draft pass by me, even though the windows were closed. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the apartment. I scrubbed surfaces, wiped countertops, and swept the floor. Then I'd hear a hiss of my name in my ear, and I'd jump, my heart pounding. By nightfall, I was too tired to fight it. I sat on my couch, refusing to look at any uncovered or reflective surfaces. Everything was taped or covered, but I could still sense movement in my peripheral vision, like something shifting behind me. My muscles kept tensing up, and my throat felt tight. Sometimes I turned my head quickly, expecting to catch whatever it was, but I saw nothing. I tried to tell myself this was temporary, that I'd get help soon. Later, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. I had to remove the towel from the mirror just enough to see what I was doing. I avoided looking at my eyes. Then I heard my name again, sounding louder than before. My shoulders jerked. I spat out the toothpaste and rinsed my mouth without raising my head. Then I felt that cold sensation behind me. The light in the bathroom flickered once. I forced myself to look up. My reflection was staring back at me, but the movement was off by a half second. Then behind it, I saw that dark shape. It almost looked like it had a face, but it was blurry. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I let out a shaky breath. I dropped my toothbrush in the sink. My reflection bent down to pick it up a moment after I did, completely out of sync. The shadow's outline twitched. A faint scraping sound filled my ears, like nails dragging on a surface. I shouted and stumbled out of the bathroom, leaving the light on. Now I'm sitting on the couch, writing this down so I can remember all the details before I see the doctor. I feel cold air brushing against my neck as I do this. There's no fan on, and the windows are sealed. I keep hearing my name in that low whisper. It stops when I hold my breath, but starts again when I let the air out. My chest is tight. My eyes burn. My entire body shakes and sweat rolls down my back. I'm not sure what's going to happen tonight. I don't know if covering everything will help anymore, but I'm going to keep trying. I'll sit here with every light on until the sun comes up, then head out to my appointment. I'm determined to figure out what's causing this. If it continues, he'll have to move somewhere without mirrors or shiny surfaces, though that's nearly impossible. Right now, I'm just trying to stay calm. My hands feel numb and my head is spinning. I'm not sure how much more of this I can take before I snap, but I'm going to do my best to hold on. I just hope that Shadow and those whispers don't get any stronger. If they do, I might not be able to stay in this apartment at all. I walked into that basement expecting dust and silence, not a hidden world of shelves and chains. The air was thick with a stale smell, like old newspapers left in a damp closet for too long. My flashlight beam revealed rows of books, each spine covered in grime. The shelves reached so high that my flashlight couldn't find the end of them. I remember squinting, trying to see where the ceiling began, but all I saw was darkness. It felt wrong, like I'd stumbled onto something people weren't meant to see. My chest felt tight, and my pulse thudded in my ears. I'd been hunting for rare manuscripts in this old manor's basement. Local rumors said the family who owned the place collected strange artifacts. Most folks in town acted like it was just local legend, but I wanted to see for myself. I pushed aside boxes, moved a few crates, and spotted a metallic glint behind a broken wardrobe. I expected maybe a trunk or a safe. Instead, I found a heavy door made of oak set into the wall. It had massive hinges and a door handle shaped like a coiled serpent. It looked older than anything else in the basement. I pulled, but it was locked. I checked around and found an iron key hanging from a nail under a rotted shelf. I tried that key, and the door creaked open, the sound echoing through the basement like a low moan. A chilly draft brushed past my arms. Past that door, a short staircase led down into a wide chamber. I aimed my flashlight around and realized I was looking at an underground library. The walls were lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. The place smelled like mildew and something else, maybe old leather. Each shelf had books of different sizes and shapes, some stacked on top of each other, some wrapped in cloth. At the far end, I saw a barricaded storage area secured by rusted chains. The links were thick and they crisscrossed a wooden double door. I walked closer, hearing my own footsteps echo on the stone floor. The chains clanked when I touched them. They were coated in orange rust and left a gritty residue on my palms. The padlock looked ancient. I pulled a small crowbar from my backpack. I carry one when I explore old structures in case of stuck doors. After a few firm tries, the padlock snapped open. The echo of breaking metal rattled my nerves, but I took a deep breath and pulled the chains aside. My flashlight flickered, and I tapped it. The corridor beyond the door was narrow, just enough space for me to walk forward without turning my shoulders. The walls were lined with small alcoves, each holding a single book or a stack of papers. Cobwebs dangled from the low ceiling. My spine tingled when I stepped inside. The deeper I went, the more I noticed strange markings on the spines of the books. They weren't in any alphabet I recognized. Some looked like scratched symbols. Others looked like they were drawn with ink that had turned brown over time. I ran my finger over one cover, and the texture felt bumpy, like it had been burned in places. I noticed the temperature dropping. My breath felt slightly colder. The only sounds were my footsteps and the faint drip of water somewhere behind me. After maybe 10 feet, the corridor opened into a small room with a stone table in the center. On top of it, there were loose pages scattered around, half covered by a dusty cloth. I lifted the cloth and found drawings of creatures that didn't look like anything from regular nature books. They had elongated limbs, blank faces, or too many eyes. Some had twisted bodies that made my stomach lurch. The lines were rough, as if someone sketched them in a hurry. My gut told me to leave them alone, but curiosity pushed me to pick up one page. The corners were stained with something dark and dry. I turned the page toward my flashlight and I felt a jolt in my chest. That thing had a mouth where its eyes should have been, and a single eye where its mouth belonged. I set the page down carefully and glanced around. I saw a few books stacked on a pedestal against the wall. The top book had a cover made of thick leather with a symbol in the center that resembled an inverted triangle with lines jutting out from each corner. I reached out, my hand unsteady, and opened the cover. The text inside was in that same weird script. The letters slanted in a way that made my eyes hurt. I flipped through a few pages and saw more drawings. Some were so detailed I felt my throat tighten. Something about them seemed alive, like they might crawl off the page if I stared too long. I swallowed hard, closed the book and stepped back. My flashlight flickered again, and for a second I thought I heard a soft rustling. It could have been the old cloth near my feet, but I wasn't sure. The corridor behind me felt darker than before, like it was closing in. I shoved the strange pages aside, not wanting to look at them anymore. My heart pounded. My arms felt prickly, and I could feel my t-shirt sticking to my back. I decided I'd had enough, so I retraced my steps, rushing past the shelves in the tall library, back up the stairs and into the basement. When I got home that night, I tried to calm myself down. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table thinking about that underground library. My mind raced with questions about who built it, who owned those books, and why they locked them away. I tried to distract myself with a normal hardcover about local history, hoping a little reading would help me relax. But after a few pages, I saw faint pencil marks in the margins. I assumed they were from a previous owner. Then I noticed some of the symbols looked like what I'd seen in that corridor. My chest tightened. I flipped a few pages ahead and saw more scribbles. They were faint, like someone had written them lightly. The lines looped and twisted in ways that didn't resemble normal handwriting. I snapped the book shut and placed it on the table. The sensation in my stomach was like I'd swallowed ice. Over the next few days, it got worse. Every book I opened had some kind of mark, even ones I'd owned for years. Some had short lines of text that I couldn't read. Others had small drawings that looked rushed, like whoever made them was doing it in secret. I sometimes found pages with only a single symbol scratched in the corner. I tried rubbing them with my thumb, and they never wiped away. They felt embedded in the paper, like part of the print. My skin crawled every time I saw a new one. I considered throwing my books away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. One night, I decided to examine the notes more carefully. I wanted to see if there was any pattern. I sat down with a notebook and copied each symbol, each weird scribble onto blank sheets of paper. The first few were scattered and didn't form any noticeable pattern, but after a while, I noticed some repeated shapes. I saw that inverted triangle again, the one from the leather book in the corridor. My pulse sped up. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, so I turned to a different book. Sure enough, there was a small triangle near the page number, and it had the same angle lines poking out from each corner. I circled it in red pen. My breathing got shallow. My hands started trembling. The clock on my kitchen wall seemed too loud. I tried contacting a friend who specialized in rare texts. I told him I had some books with strange annotations, asked if he could take a look. He came over with a magnifying glass and studied a few pages. He said the script reminded him of some archaic language, but he couldn't identify it. He asked where I got them. I hesitated, then lied, saying I found them at an estate sale. He suggested I reach out to a professor in ancient languages at a nearby university. I nodded, but never made the call. I was worried about drawing more attention to these notes. Something about them felt personal, like whoever wrote them was trying to speak to me directly. Each day, the markings grew bolder. I'd open a book about cooking or travel, and find entire paragraphs in that strange writing. The pencil lines got darker, more confident. Sometimes I heard a scratching sound at night, like a pencil on paper, but it always stopped when I listened closely. I started losing sleep. My nights were filled with restless tossing, half-baked nightmares about those creatures in the drawings. I'd wake up sweating, with my heart pounding. Every little noise in the house made me jump. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned, and I felt on edge all the time. I kept thinking back to that corridor and the bizarre sketches. I wondered if I brought something home with me that day, some kind of presence attached to my curiosity. It made me uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. I took my books and locked them in a small chest in my attic, hoping that would stop the notes. The next morning, I went upstairs to check and found the chest wide open. My books were back on the shelves where I normally kept them. I stood there staring at them with a cold sweat on my forehead. I had locked that chest, I was sure. My key was still in my dresser. I backed away, closed the attic door, and walked downstairs. My head felt light, and my jaw was clenched. I went to the kitchen and splashed water on my face. I gripped the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what was happening in my own house. Then I told myself, maybe I just forgot to lock the chest, or maybe I changed my mind and put the books back without remembering. I tried to rationalize it, but my gut told me something else was going on. That afternoon, I chose a random paperback from my living room shelf, an old mystery novel. I flipped through it in the living room, my heart pounding. The margins were covered in those same twisted letters, page after page. My eyes darted across each line, and suddenly realized one of the words was repeated over and over. It appeared on multiple pages. I couldn't read the entire phrase, but that one word stood out. It looked like return or something close to it. I'm not even sure if it was in English, but it felt like an instruction. My mouth went dry. I decided to go back to the underground library. I grabbed my flashlight, crowbar, and gloves. I didn't pack anything else. My hands shook as I drove to the old manor. When I got there, the front gate was still broken, and the basement door was unlocked. The stairs down to that hidden section were exactly how I left them. I moved carefully, feeling the cold air again. I turned on my flashlight and saw the corridor door was still open. The chains lay on the ground where I dropped them. I stepped inside, my pulse hammering in my chest. The corridor smelled the same, damp and musty. I walked toward the small room at the end. The stone table was still there, as were the loose pages. I felt like the walls were pressing in on me. I skimmed the pages on the table again, looking for anything that matched the word I thought I saw in my book. My flashlight showed me the same vile creatures, the same twisted forms, but then I spotted a new page lying under the table. I crouched down and picked it up. It had more of that script, darker than before, like someone had scrawled it recently. The ink looked fresh, almost glossy in the light. My hand shook when I saw a repeated shape that reminded me of the symbols in my margins at home. I heard a slight scuff behind me and spun around. The corridor was empty, but I felt watched. My scalp prickled. I inched forward, shining my flashlight around the edges of the room. Nothing moved. I steadied my breathing and tucked the page into my jacket. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my temples. I took one last look at the shelves along the walls, then turned to leave. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that someone or something was behind me. My foot caught on a loose stone, and I stumbled, banging my knee against the floor. The pain shot through my leg, and I stifled a groan. I limped out of the corridor, up the stairs, and back to the basement. I never locked the door behind me. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. When I got home, my entire body was tense, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I opened my jacket to look at the page. The text was long, with lines crossing each other in strange ways. At the bottom, there was a small image of that inverted triangle. My mouth felt cotton dry. I tossed it on my kitchen table and paced around, too nervous to sit. My pulse wouldn't slow down. Eventually I calmed enough to take a closer look. I noticed a slight indentation on the edges, like someone had pressed hard with a pen. I flipped it over and saw a faint marking on the back. It looked like a handprint, smaller than mine. but the fingers seemed too long. I ran my fingertip across it. The paper felt cold, almost damp. I dropped it on the table, my head spun with confusion and dread. Every time I open a book now, I see more notes. They fill entire chapters, swirling around the text. I can read them, but they feel urgent. Sometimes I hear soft scribbling when I'm alone in my room. I jump out of bed to check, but I never find anyone. My arms break out in goosebumps, and my legs feel weak. I keep expecting a person to step out of the shadows, but all I see is my empty hallway or living room. It's gotten to the point where I avoid reading anything. I can't relax. I keep thinking about that corridor, that storage area with the rusted chains and strange drawings. I don't know how to stop these notes. They appear whether I like it or not, and I can't stand the thought of them growing stronger. Sometimes I consider burning all my books, but I'm scared that might make things worse. Instead, I just live with them, day after day, hearing invisible pencils on paper, and seeing words in a language I can decipher. My hands tremble every time I open a cover, expecting more lines, more symbols, more messages that I can't understand. I feel trapped. I feel like I crossed a line in that underground library and now there's no going back. That's where I stand. I have no answers, just endless questions and a quiet fear. Every time I see a blank piece of paper, I wonder if it'll stay blank. Every time I hear a rustle at night, I hold my breath. I keep hoping I'll wake up one day and it'll be gone, that the words and scribbles will vanish. But so far they haven't faded. They're still here, etched into my books, filling my mind with dread, and I can't shake the feeling that I started something I'm not meant to finish. I still remember the first morning I saw those words on my new whiteboard. I stopped in the doorway, blinked a few times, and felt an odd pressure in my chest. The handwriting looked rushed, almost frantic, and I had no idea who wrote it. That was enough to make me step back and swallow hard. I thought about calling someone, but something made me hold my phone in my pocket. I decided to check it out on my own. I never expected that one strange discovery to lead me down a path of sleepless nights and uneasy days. Now I'm here, in my office, trying to make sense of what's happening. My heart feels tight every time I glance at that board. I don't have anywhere else to turn, so I'm writing it all down. I had installed that whiteboard a few weeks ago. It was a regular, large magnetic whiteboard. I wanted it for brainstorming and making task lists. I set it up on the far wall behind my desk. It was at eye level, easy to reach, and I kept a couple of markers on a small ledge beneath it. I remember feeling pretty proud of myself for organizing my workspace. I'm not the neatest person, but this was a step in the right direction. On a Monday morning, I unlocked my office and walked in with a cup of coffee. My computer was off, which was normal. My chair was still tucked in, so no one had been in here as far as I could tell. Then I saw the whiteboard. There were lines of text scrolled across it. It wasn't my handwriting. It was small, sharp, and tilted to the right. I got closer to read it. The first line said something about hidden corners and dim corridors. The next line was something about dark symbols. My throat felt dry when I tried to speak. I didn't see any sign of forced entry, and my office door had been locked. I shook my head and decided to wipe the board clean. I took an eraser and wiped over the words until the board was blank. I rubbed it 3 or 4 times to make sure no faint markings were left. Then I walked out to the break room to get more coffee and calm my nerves. A few co-workers passed by me and said hi. I didn't bring it up. It felt too weird. I wanted to see if it would happen again before telling anyone. When I came back, the board was still empty. That made me feel better. I opened my computer and started my day. I didn't see anything else unusual that Monday. I finished my tasks, had a few meetings, and locked up around 6 p.m. The board stayed blank. Tuesday morning, I came in a bit earlier. I switched on the lights. My eyes went straight to the whiteboard. My jaw tensed up as I stepped forward. The writing was back, but it was different. The letters were bigger, and the words mentioned ancient chants and doors that should not be opened. It felt like my chest was constricting. I ran my fingers across the writing, and the markers were still fresh. I didn't hear or see anyone around. I looked out into the hallway. The rest of the floor was quiet. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos of the writing. I wanted proof. Then I erased it again. The marker wiped away easily, leaving no trace. I decided I'd talk to security if it happened again. The day went on without any problems. I had lunch at my desk and kept glancing at the whiteboard. It stayed white and clean. Nothing else showed up that day. I started getting jumpy in my office. Each small noise in the hallway made me spin in my chair. People walking by sometimes startled me. I began leaving my lights on even when I went out for a break. Usually I turned them off to save energy, but this time I wanted to see everything clearly if I came back. The tension in my chest grew. My stomach felt tight. I tried to focus on work, but my attention drifted to the board every few minutes. On Wednesday night, I stayed late. I had a project deadline. Around 9 p.m., I heard a scratchy noise coming from behind me. It sounded like a pen or marker scraping on the surface. I froze, every muscle tensed. I turned around slowly. The board was dark in the corner of the room because the lamp on my desk didn't reach it fully. I leaned forward and squinted. I saw faint shapes on the board, like lines forming. My head pounded. I flicked on the overhead light. The writing was there again, but this time I witnessed it appearing. Each letter formed one stroke at a time, as if someone invisible was pressing the marker against the surface. I couldn't see a hand though. I just saw the lines appear. The marker itself was in its place on the ledge, but it moved on its own. Its tip scratched across the board with a soft squeak. My legs shook. My arms felt weak. I stood up and rushed to the board. I tried to grab the marker, but it slid away from my fingers and continued writing. My heart thumped so hard I thought I'd pass out. The words were about hidden catacombs, obscene gatherings, and forbidden texts, a chaotic set of phrases. I yelled and swiped at the marker, which fell to the floor with a dull clack. The letters stopped forming. I stood there for a moment, breathing fast, my hands trembling. I leaned against my desk to steady myself, then looked at the text. It ended abruptly in the middle of a sentence. I didn't see any movement on the floor. The marker was still. I wiped the board, threw the marker away, and grabbed my bag. I left the office without powering off my computer. I needed to get home and breathe. I didn't sleep much that night, replaying the scene in my mind and checking my bedroom door, feeling uneasy despite my office being miles away. My phone was on my nightstand, but I didn't tell anyone about what happened. I thought about calling a friend or maybe a priest, but it sounded too unbelievable. The next morning, I arrived at work late. When I opened my office door, I felt a weight in my stomach. The whiteboard had new writing again, thick lines and words about dark altars and speaking with voices beyond. I also noticed that the phrases looked more organized, spaced out, aligned in a way that suggested some sort of pattern. I ran my hand over my face, feeling sweat on my forehead. I decided to call building security. A tall guy named Marcus showed up with a notepad. I told him about unauthorized entry. I showed him photos on my phone. We checked the security cameras in the hallway. No one had entered or exited my office at those times. The hallway camera showed nothing. No one had come in late. My passcode was used, but only by me. Marcus gave me a confused look and said he'd keep an eye on things. That night I stayed in the office again, but I kept all the lights on. I also kept my phone in my hand, ready to record. It got late. My eyelids were heavy. I felt that same scratchy sound behind me. I jerked around and aimed my phone's camera at the board. The marker was moving on its own again. It made rough squeaks against the surface. I tried to record it. My phone screen showed the marker moving, but the letters came out blurred in the footage. I also noticed that the air felt colder near the board. My arms felt covered in goosebumps. I stepped closer, feeling a chill on my neck. I saw new text forming in large, bold words. They said, "I am here." My stomach twisted. I almost dropped my phone. I watched the marker under that phrase as if it was waiting. Then it spelled more words. "I will speak." I couldn't believe it. I reached out and touched the marker. My fingertips felt a static buzz like a small electric current. I pulled my hand back and rubbed my fingers together. The marker dropped and clattered against the ledge. I grabbed the eraser and wiped the board again, pressing so hard my arm hurt. I left the board shining white, then backed away. The lights flickered once. I checked the overhead fixture. It flickered again, then stabilized. My heart was racing. I decided to leave right then, almost running out of the office. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. Over the next few days, I tried to continue working like normal, but I felt exhausted and tense. When I sat at my desk, I kept looking over my shoulder. The board always had new writing in the morning. Sometimes it just repeated words like ritual, chamber, summon, whisper, and abyss. Other times it spelled entire paragraphs with details about hidden places and cryptic symbols. I never knew how to handle it. Erasing it felt useless, but I still did it. I didn't want people walking in and seeing it. At night, I heard that familiar scratching noise. I started using a smaller desk lamp to watch the board without casting shadows. My entire body felt tense. My lower back ached, my shoulders were stiff, and my eyes stung from staring, waiting for something to happen. Then the marker would lift again, and I'd watch letters appear in real time. Each time it felt more directed at me. The words included listen, obey, and respond. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to find out, but I also couldn't ignore it. One day I decided to get rid of the board. I pulled it off the wall. It was attached by 4 screws. My hands shook as I unscrewed them. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. Once it was off, I carried it into the storage room down the hall and placed it behind some boxes. Then I returned to my office. I felt good for a moment, like maybe it was over. I sat in my chair and stared at the empty wall. I rubbed my hands on my pants to get rid of the sweat. The next morning, I came in to see a makeshift whiteboard pinned to the wall. It was a piece of white cardboard with the same handwriting on it. I checked the hallway to see if someone was playing a prank, but no one was there. I touched the cardboard. It felt cold, like it had been in a freezer. The writing mentioned, "You cannot hide, return and continue." That was enough for me to feel nauseous. I ran to the restroom. I splashed water on my face and leaned over the sink, breathing fast. When I went back to my office, the piece of cardboard was gone. I grabbed my phone and walked to the storage room. The whiteboard was back on the wall in there, standing upright with new writing all over it, words and big letters. It read, "You will see." I pulled at my hair, trying to stay calm. My mouth felt dry, and I could taste bile in my throat. I tried to ignore it and do my work in my office, but the air felt thick. My thoughts kept drifting to what that thing might want from me. I focused on the physical details. My sweaty palms, my rapid heartbeat, the dryness in my mouth. I felt alone. I left the building early and spent the evening pacing around my apartment. I had no appetite. I tried to watch television, but my mind wandered. The situation got even stranger over the next week. Every day, the messages became more complete. They outlined instructions for some kind of ritual, referencing steps, objects, times of night. I refused to follow them. I barely read them before erasing them, but I couldn't help noticing certain words. I saw references to a hidden location and a repeated symbol that looked like a star with crooked edges. Each time my skin crawled, and my mind went blank for a few seconds. I tried moving desks. I took my laptop to a different corner of the office, but it didn't matter. At night, I still heard the board squeaking somewhere. If I tried to ignore it, it got louder. If I peeked out into the hallway, I heard nothing. Then I'd return to my desk, and the squeaking would resume. When I checked the board, there was always fresh writing. I started sleeping less. My eyes looked sunken in the mirror. I had dark circles under them. My hands felt shaky. Even when I drank water, I couldn't stand the suspense of hearing that marker slide across the board. I'd stand there and watch the lines form, but I couldn't bring myself to do anything except erase them afterward. One night, around 11 p.m., I felt a sudden chill in the air. My breath came out in short bursts. The overhead light flickered. My desk lamp went dim. I heard the marker. This time, I walked to the board and let it write without interfering. I saw each word speak to me. I swallowed hard. My face felt hot, and my forehead was damp with sweat. My pulse pounded. I reached out and touched the board. My fingers felt a low vibration, like a faint hum. I leaned in, keeping my hand there. The marker spelled another phrase. I have waited. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My chest felt tight. The marker slipped out of its holder and hovered in front of the board. It wrote, "Answer." I pressed my palms against the board, hoping to push whatever force was there away. The vibration grew stronger for a second. Then the marker dropped. I gasped and took a step back. I stared at the words for a minute. Then I erased them. I knew this would happen again. It felt impossible to stop. I don't know how to make it end, but I'm still here. Each night I stay in the office with the lights on, waiting for that marker to move. I hear the faint squeaks and see words about hidden realms, ancient rites, and dark places that I can't name. My hands shake and my heart pounds, but I keep going. For now, that's all I can do. I sit here, wide awake, feeling my stomach clench with every new squeak of the marker. The messages become clearer each time, almost like whoever or whatever is behind them is gaining confidence. The words are bigger and more direct. They focus on me, telling me to act. I haven't acted yet, but I feel it pushing me. My head hurts, and my eyes burn from staring at the board. When I finally leave, my ears still ring with the memory of that squeaking sound. At home, I can sleep. I just lie in bed with my phone in my hand, waiting for morning. That's where I stand. I have no idea what will happen next. I only know that each day the messages keep appearing. I don't know if it will ever stop, but I'm here, facing that board, no matter how much my skin crawls or my heart races. In taking deep breaths and wiping away the words, even when they feel like they burn into my mind. Right now, I just want to hold on to some sense of control. I need to see if there's a limit. I haven't found it yet. The words keep coming, and the board remains. I can't hide from it. I'm stuck in this office, surrounded by these walls, alone with this thing that's trying to speak to me, and I can't pretend I don't hear it. I still remember how my hands shook when I first saw those faces in the fire. I was alone in a remote valley, trying to enjoy a weekend of camping. I had been there a few times before, and I always liked the silence in open space. But something changed that night. Something gripped me and wouldn't let go. I arrived at the valley in the late afternoon. My backpack felt heavy, and my shoulders hurt from the long hike. The air was still, and I only heard distant birds and the rustle of a breeze passing through dry shrubs. I picked a spot close to a small stream. The ground there was mostly flat, and I found a circle of rocks someone had used for a campfire before. I set down my gear and pitched my tent. It took me about 30 minutes to secure everything. I checked the tent poles and stakes because I didn't want any trouble later. As dusk settled, I collected some firewood. The fallen branches around the site felt damp, so I looked for pieces that were partly sheltered under bigger trees. My hands got dirty and scraped by the rough bark, and my legs were tired from bending down, but I gathered enough to keep a fire going for a few hours. I placed the wood inside the circle of rocks, took out a lighter, and tried to ignite some dried leaves. It took a few attempts before a small flame caught. It blew on it gently until the flames spread along the edges of the twigs. The fire crackled. I sat on a folded blanket, stretched my legs, and stared at the flames. They moved in uneven patterns, shooting little sparks into the air. I felt calm at first. My eyes grew heavy from the day's effort, but I forced myself to stay awake for a bit longer, wanting to savor the quiet. While I watched, something odd started to happen. I noticed shapes in the flames, but not the usual shifting forms. It looked like faces. Their mouths opened and closed. It felt like they were whispering, but I couldn't make out any words. At first, I thought I was just tired. I blinked a few times and rubbed my eyes, but the shapes got clearer. I leaned forward, my heartbeat sped up, and I tasted a metallic dryness in my mouth. The faces seemed twisted, and they moved in a slow, strange way, as if they were trying to speak. I heard soft hissing sounds. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I tried to shake off the feeling by standing up and stepping away. Then I heard a faint whisper. It was like a hushed voice next to my ear. I whipped around, but there was no one. My breath came in quick bursts, and I could feel my shoulders tightening. I forced myself to look back at the fire. The wood cracked and sent a popping noise into the air. The flames flared up, and the faces appeared again. This time I heard distinct murmuring sounds. They weren't loud, but they had a rhythm that reminded me of someone trying to chant. I sat down again, pressing my palms against my thighs. I wanted to understand what the whispers were saying. I leaned in, and the heat pressed against my face. The murmurs got more distinct, and I heard words like trail, ravine, and follow. It was all jumbled, but it was there. I felt my chest tighten. My heart pounded so hard that I thought it might burst from my chest. I glanced around, but there was only darkness in the outline of nearby bushes. Nobody else was there. The voice came from the flames. I stood up again and backed away. As soon as I stepped back, the flames rose higher, as if they were reaching out. I felt a wave of heat that made my eyes water. I heard more words, something about an old path, and a drop into a deep cut in the earth. I knew there was a ravine in the area, but I had never gone that far on foot. A rush of cold panic filled my stomach. My legs quivered, and my breathing grew shallow. I decided to walk away from the fire. I only made it a few steps before the flames surged in brightness. It felt like the campfire turned into a small furnace. The light poured out in a long shape, forming a tunnel of heat and glare. I raised my arms to shield my face. My eyes stung. The air sizzled. I heard the whispering grow louder, and it felt like several voices speaking at once, pushing me to move toward that ravine. I remember clenching my fists and standing there, torn between fear and a bizarre urge to follow the instructions. My skin felt hot, and sweat ran down my forehead. My heart hammered. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I turned around, facing my tent, trying to get away from that tunnel of light. As soon as I shifted my weight, the flames died down a bit, as if they were trying to lure me back with some trick.
I didn't give in.
I darted inside my tent and zipped it up. My hands trembled so badly that I struggled with the zipper. Once I was inside, I sat in the darkness and listened to my own breathing. I heard faint crackling outside. The whispering got muffled, but I knew it was still there. I sat cross-legged, staring at nothing, trying to calm down. My chest felt tight, and my lungs ached. I forced myself to take slow breaths. Eventually the fire burned down. I could tell because the glow against the tent walls grew weaker. I stayed awake until I heard almost no noise outside. My eyes felt heavy, so I lay down on my sleeping bag. My mind buzzed with confusion, but exhaustion took over. I drifted off, hoping morning would bring some sense of normalcy. I woke up after sunrise. My neck was stiff and my lower back ached from the uneven ground. I opened the tent, and the air smelled like damp ashes. The remains of the fire were a pile of charcoal and half-burned sticks. The circle of rocks looked normal. Nothing seemed out of place. The hush of the valley surrounded me. I tried to convince myself that I had been hallucinating from fatigue, but when I got closer to the fire pit, I felt a chill. The charcoal pieces looked scorched in odd patterns, almost like shapes of contorted faces. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake off the memory. I quickly packed my gear, not wanting to spend another moment in that spot. My hands felt clammy, and I kept looking around, expecting to see something watching me. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and started back down the trail. My head pounded with each step. I didn't talk to anyone on the way. I didn't run into any other hikers. When I got back home, I tried to settle into my routine. I put my gear in a closet. I took a hot shower and tried to relax. My muscles were sore, but at least I was in familiar territory. For a few days, I avoided thinking about what had happened. I went to work, watched TV in the evening, and pretended everything was normal. Then one night, I lit a candle during a power outage. The flame flickered, and I heard a low murmur. I froze. My mouth felt dry, and my eyes locked onto the tiny flicker of light. The whisper was faint, but I recognized it. It had the same tone I had heard in the valley. I snapped the candle out, heart pounding, and stayed in the dark. I didn't want to risk it. My mind raced. I wondered if I was losing my mind, but I knew what I heard. From that point on, I couldn't light a match, a candle, or even a lighter without hearing those voices. Every single time I heard that same soft chanting, the same push to seek out places I didn't know. The voice mentioned different trails, some references to a gorge or a hollow area in the ground. The words were scattered, but they always felt urgent. I developed a habit of avoiding fire altogether. I stopped cooking with a gas stove. I ate cold food or used an electric stovetop. I carried a flashlight and I stored away all the matches and lighters I had. But sometimes, I slipped up or forgot about the problem. One afternoon, a friend asked me to help grill burgers in his backyard. I tried to decline, but he insisted. As soon as I lit the grill, my ears buzzed with low whispers. I jerked back, dropping the lighter. My friend asked if I was okay, and I just made up an excuse about burning my finger. My heart pounded in my chest. As I moved away from the grill, I could still hear that soft chanting in the back of my mind. I pretended I needed something from my car and left the yard. My arms tingled. My forehead was damp with sweat. Even though the day was mild, I told him I had a headache and drove home. In the weeks that followed, I became jumpy. I avoided any open flames. If I saw someone smoking with a lighter, I turned away. When I went to the grocery store, I skipped the aisle with candles. The memory of those faces in the campfire haunted me. I had nightmares about them whispering commands, pulling me toward that ravine. I woke up with my shirt soaked in sweat, my heart banging against my ribs. my body feeling stiff and my breath shallow. I wondered if there was some place in the valley that would explain all this. I considered going back to see if I could figure out what happened, but the idea of lighting another fire scared me. I couldn't imagine listening to those voices again, urging me to walk into some unknown pit in the ground. My mind replayed that tunnel of heat and light. I remembered how the flames grew taller when I tried to walk away. I remembered the strange feeling that I was being watched or maybe guided. I spent a long time trying to avoid the subject, but curiosity nagged at me. The voices talked about old trails and hidden rituals. I wanted to see if there was any proof of that in local maps or records. I visited the library in my town. I looked through old trail guides, scanning for mentions of anything unusual in that region. The documents only showed standard paths and normal geographic features, nothing about odd ravines or secret spots. I tried asking a few folks who liked to hike near that valley if they had ever encountered strange things. They just shook their heads and said the place was quiet, sometimes windy, but nothing out of the ordinary. When I returned to my house, I noticed I was sweating. My face felt hot and my hands trembled. Even reading about the area made me think of the whispering. I could almost hear it in my head. My shoulders tensed up and I had trouble focusing on simple tasks. I started double-checking my doors and windows at night, feeling uneasy, like something was going to show up and force me to light a fire. The next time I even considered lighting anything was when I tried to help a neighbor who had a small bonfire going in his backyard. He just wanted an extra pair of hands to manage some branches he was burning. I stepped closer to the flames, and my stomach turned. My throat went dry, and my ears rang. The fire crackled, and I heard those faint whispers again. They said something about a path near a waterfall hidden behind rocks. My knees felt weak. I stepped back and told him I couldn't do it. He looked at me with confusion, but he didn't press the issue. I went home and shut my door, breathing fast, my heart pounding. I started having trouble sleeping. Every night I felt this pull to go back to that valley. My sheets stuck to my skin and I tossed and turned. I fantasized about just driving out there and looking at the spot where I camped, but I kept remembering how the fire had beckoned me. I was scared of losing control if I tried to confront that presence again. One evening I reached a breaking point. My electricity flickered off during a storm and I needed a light. I stood in my living room holding a small flashlight with fresh batteries, but it was dim. I checked my drawer for more batteries, but I was out. The only other way to see was to light a candle. I stared at that candle for a while, fighting with myself. My teeth clenched, my neck felt stiff. Finally, I lit it. The moment the flame caught, I heard that murmur. My jaw tightened, and I felt a flash of heat spread through my chest. My scalp tingled. I listened as the whisper repeated those words. Something about following a trail to a place where the ground drops off. I blew out the candle, but my mind still buzzed with that voice. I stood in the darkness, feeling sweat on my temples. I decided to get in my car and drive away from my house. I felt like I needed fresh air. The roads were slick from the storm. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles pale. My breath was shaky. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting something to materialize. Rain pelted the windshield. The wipers squeaked. I drove aimlessly for almost an hour before returning home. Still rattled. It's been like that ever since. I can't like anything. I can't watch people start campfires without feeling my chest tighten. Every flame I encounter seems to whisper those same instructions. The voice doesn't change. It always talks about hidden paths, deep cuts in the land, and rituals that I don't understand. My nights are restless, and my days are tense. I still haven't gone back to that valley, and I'm not sure if I ever will. I feel something wants me there, but I'm not ready to face it. I have considered telling a doctor or therapist, but I'm afraid they'll think I'm just stressed or hallucinating. This isn't about hallucinations. I know what I heard. I can still hear it if I close my eyes and imagine a spark or flame. The memory is strong, and my body reacts as if I'm still there, crouched next to that fire, seeing those twisted faces and listening to their words. I haven't found a way to stop it, and I've given up on trying to ignore it. Now I just live day by day, hoping that I can avoid any situation where I need fire. Sometimes it works. Sometimes I slip up and need a match or lighter, and then the voices return. That night in the valley changed everything for me. I can't explain why the flames showed me those faces or why the whispers call me to that ravine. I just know they do, and I know I'm stuck with it. It's like a constant presence hovering over my shoulder. waiting for a spark to bring it back to life. When I try to describe it, I can't do it justice. It's not poetic or symbolic. It's a real voice in real flames, telling me to go somewhere I don't want to go. And that's all I can say. It's here, and it's real. I hear it, and I feel its pull. I'm not sure if I'll ever light another fire without hearing those whispers again. I remember the first day I set foot on that remote site. The heat pounded on top of my head, and the air felt stale even though we were in an open desert plain. I arrived by jeep with 2 local guides, but they left after dropping me off near a small rise of rock and sand. I felt a jolt of excitement in my stomach because I'd heard rumors of untouched ruins. My head buzzed with curiosity. As an independent researcher who specializes in ancient artifacts, I'd traveled across several borders to reach this place. I expected some crumbling stones and maybe a few scattered shards of pottery. I had no idea I'd find something so strange and unsettling that it still haunts me. I unpacked my equipment near the remains of a half-buried structure. Most of it looked like every other ruin I'd seen. A few walls, some remnants of carvings along the edges, and debris from what might have been a roof. But when I started clearing away the sand near the eastern side, I discovered the top of what looked like a set of stairs. It surprised me because there was no official record of a subterranean passage in this location. I got down on my knees and brushed away the dirt. The stairs appeared intact, made from a dark stone that I couldn't identify right away. My pulse quickened. I got my flashlight and peered down, trying to see how deep it went, but I couldn't see the bottom. The angle of light revealed just enough to show a steep descent. I tied one end of a rope to a metal stake, secured it in the ground, and held onto it as I went down. My heart thumped with each step. The echo of my boots against the stone made a low, hollow sound. The walls became visible after the first few steps, and I stopped when I noticed inscriptions. They looked like hieroglyphs, but not ones I recognized from any major civilization. At first I thought maybe they were some local variant, yet they had lines and curves that didn't match any known writing system I'd studied. What unnerved me more was the faint glow they emitted when my flashlight beam hit them. It wasn't bright. It was like a slight reflection that seemed to move around the edges of the symbols. I moved my hand close to the inscriptions, trying to sense heat or any vibration. Nothing. They felt cool, just like regular stone. My breathing grew shallow. I couldn't explain why, but something about those carvings made me want to back away. Still, I forced myself to keep going. The staircase twisted and the passage narrowed. My shoulders brushed the walls a few times, sending loose chips of stone skittering down each step. The air smelled stale, but there was also a faint tang, like metal or damp moss, though I couldn't pinpoint its source. At one turn I paused, because I heard an echo. It sounded like a far-off chant. It rose for a moment, then faded. I turned off my flashlight to listen better. The darkness swallowed me. My ears picked up a faint rhythm, almost like breathing, but it wasn't coming from me. My skin prickled and I felt my jaw tighten. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the air shifting or an acoustic quirk of the tunnel. I switched the flashlight back on and continued down. As I pressed on, I started noticing a recurring symbol on the walls. It looked like a human face, but without eyes or mouth. The surface was smoothed over where the facial features should have been. This image repeated every few feet, sometimes in different sizes, but always the same blank face. Seeing it over and over made my stomach churn. I tried to think of a rational explanation. Maybe it was a guardian figure or some protective symbol, but none of my usual references fit. My hands felt clammy. They rubbed them on my pants, but the unease stuck to me. At a certain point I realized the tunnel was leveling out. The floor was no longer steps, but flat stone. My flashlight started flickering. I tapped it, assuming it was just the batteries, but a new set had been in there that morning. The flicker created shifting shadows on the walls, and I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around, shining the light at the spot. Nothing, just the same carved face, without eyes or mouth. I laughed nervously and pressed forward, but my stomach churned. After a few more yards I found a large chamber. My flashlight revealed a vaulted ceiling with thick support pillars. The chamber was almost empty, except for a few stone pedestals scattered around, with no statues or artifacts on top of them. Then I noticed the inscriptions along the pillars. They were like the ones I'd seen before, but more elaborate. Some lines looked sharp, as if they'd been etched recently. Others were worn down. The entire chamber gave me a sense of weight, as if the air itself pressed on me. I heard that echoing chant again, so faint that I wondered if my mind was playing tricks, but it sounded close, like it was in the walls. I stepped toward the center of the chamber, shining the flashlight around. That's when I realized the floor had a large circular design, a swirl of lines converging into the safe of that same faceless visage. I felt a pressure in my chest, as if an invisible hand pushed me away from that design. I tried to approach it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd regret stepping onto it. My pulse hammered, and my palms were slick with sweat. I decided I'd seen enough. I didn't want to explore further alone, especially with my flashlight acting up. I turned around and walked back the way I came, trying to ignore the sense that something followed me. Climbing back up the stairs was harder than going down. My lungs burned from the musty air. My muscles felt weaker than normal, like I'd been walking for hours. The faint chanting sound echoed behind me, or maybe in my own head. I couldn't tell. At each step, I'd glance back, half expecting to see a figure in the tunnel, but there was nothing. Only that constant design of a face without eyes or mouth carved along the walls. When I finally reached the surface, the late afternoon sun stung my eyes. I hadn't realized how long I'd been down there. My campsite was about a quarter-mile away. I walked back, feeling a rush of relief with every step I took away from that subterranean place. Yet once I started setting up my camp stove, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My heart was still pounding, and my mouth felt dry. I drank water and tried to eat a protein bar, but it tasted like chalk. I forced it down, telling myself I'd just encountered something odd and needed rest. That night, I woke up around midnight. I'd fallen asleep on my cot, fully dressed. I sat up, unsure what had jolted me awake. Then I saw flashes inside my head. I wasn't dreaming. My eyes were open, but I saw an image of a dark hall, lined with statues of people without faces. They were slightly moving, as if they would twist their heads or shift their shoulders when I wasn't looking directly at them. My chest tightened and sweat beaded on my forehead. My tent felt suffocating. I scrambled outside, looked around, saw only the night sky and quiet dunes, but that image stayed in my mind like an after-image on a screen. For the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. I'd doze off for a few minutes and then jerk awake, gasping. Each time, I'd see those faceless figures getting closer. In one vision, I stood in that chamber with the swirling design on the floor, and the statues formed a circle around me. I remember feeling short of breath, as though I couldn't get enough air. Each figure leaned toward me, silent, as if they were waiting for me to do something. I stayed awake until dawn, pacing around the camp and checking my supplies to distract myself, but I felt a persistent nag in my gut. The next day, I decided to leave. I packed up my gear, jumped in my Jeep, and drove for hours to the nearest town. I wanted to forget that place. Yet on the drive, I noticed shapes shifting in my peripheral vision. I'd glance at the rearview mirror and see a flicker of movement in the back seat. But when I turned around, no one was there. By the time I reached the hotel, I was drenched in sweat. My stomach churned with nausea. I checked into a room and tried to calm down. I told myself I'd do some research. I'd look up any local legends or records that might explain this weird underground site. But every time I opened my laptop to search, I'd see that blank face in my mind. I'd hear a distant echo like that chant. I'd slam the computer shut and sit there, head in my hands, trying to steady my breathing. My shoulders ached. My neck felt stiff. It was like I couldn't escape the constant tension. I forced myself to eat some bread and drink some water, but I couldn't do much else that day. My body felt like it was still in that tunnel, crouched and alert. Over the following week, I tried to resume my normal routine. I made calls to a few colleagues, trying to figure out if anyone had heard of a lost civilization with faceless imagery. Most of them said no. A couple were intrigued, but they didn't have answers. At night, I started having more vivid episodes. I'd see that same hall of statues in my head. Sometimes I'd feel a cold breeze, as if an air current brushed against my skin, even though my window was closed. I'd hear that strange chant again. My heart would race, and I'd grip the edges of my bed, telling myself to calm down, but my breathing would come in short gasps, and I'd feel a tingling in my limbs. After a few days, I started noticing changes around me. I'd see shadows move in my apartment hallway. Doors would feel heavy, like they were stuck. I'd try to open them, and they'd creak in a way that reminded me of that faint chanting sound. My phone would buzz, but when I answered it, nobody spoke on the other end. Then I think I heard breathing, but it was always faint and distant. At one point I looked out my window at night and thought I saw a silhouette on the street below. It looked like a figure without a face, just standing there staring up at me. I blinked, and it was gone. I tried everything to break away from these experiences. I told myself I just invented some psychological fear from being in that eerie place. But it wouldn't leave me alone. Every day, the visions became sharper. I'd see the statues in the corner of my eye when I walked into my living room. I'd spin around fast, and they'd vanish. My chest would pound, and I'd have to steady myself. My shower drain gurgled in a low tone that made me think of that chanting. I'd shut off the water and stand there, my ears straining for any other sound. It felt like my mind was splitting, but I knew it was real enough to make me tremble. Finally, I realized what these visions were pointing toward. They wanted me to go back. The images of the statues seemed to beckon me, inching closer each night like they were crowding around me in my bedroom. I'd smell that damp metallic odor I noticed in the tunnel. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my eyes locked on the dark corners of the room, expecting one of those faceless figures to materialize. My hands would shake as I fumbled for the bedside lamp. I'd feel relief for a second. Then I'd see a flicker at the edge of the light, like a shape receding into the shadows. I started having panic attacks during the daytime. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I tried reading old expedition notes, but I'd see random letters form the shape of that blank face on the page. I'd slam the notebook shut. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I realized I couldn't live like this. The pressure in my head was unbearable, like a constant tension that wouldn't loosen. So I made a decision. I gathered my gear again. I booked a flight back to the region. I told myself I'd go to the tunnel one last time, investigate properly, and see if there's something I missed. Maybe a hidden clue or an artifact that needed to be moved or destroyed. I couldn't think of a logical explanation, but I was too desperate to keep ignoring it. My nights were filled with creeping shapes and silent chanting. I needed to face it, or at least see if going back would make it stop. Right now, I'm in a cheap motel room near the old route that leads to the site. My hands are trembling as I write this. My stomach feels tight. The air here is stale, but I keep the window shut because I don't like hearing the desert wind moan outside. It reminds me of that echo in the tunnel. I've laid out my flashlight, extra batteries, rope, and a camera. I've also got my phone with some tracking apps, but I doubt there's any signal in that remote area. I plan to leave at first light. I don't want to stumble on that site in the dark. I already feel my heart pounding. My shoulders ache from tension. My mind keeps flashing on those blank statues. I imagine them waiting in that large chamber. I picture them turning their heads to watch me approach. My breath shudders each time I think about it. But I have no choice now. I can't escape these visions unless I confront whatever's down there. I have this creeping sensation that once I enter that passage, I might see things I can't explain. The chanting might get louder, the walls might shift, but I'm beyond caring about logic. I need relief. I need to look those faceless figures in whatever they call a face and see if there's a way to stop these visions. Tomorrow, drive to that spot, climb down those steps again, and face whatever lurks in that chamber. The thought makes my spine tingle, but I'm out of options. I feel like my life has been on pause since I left. My world is just me and those statues. Whether I'm awake or asleep, I can promise I'll come away with answers, but I have to try. If I don't, I'll end up jumping at shadows for the rest of my life. I just hope that returning doesn't make things worse. Yet part of me senses that's exactly what they want. If they want me back down there, and I'm going, I can shake the feeling that this isn't just some forgotten ruin, but something else. Something that reached out to me and won't let go. I'm not expecting some dramatic confrontation, but I know I have to step into the darkness again. Maybe I'll finally see what's really inside that place. Or maybe it will see me first. I just hope that when I come out, if I do come out the same way I went in, I'll be free from these visions. I'm ready? Or at least I'm going no matter how I feel. Right now, my body is shaking and my mouth is dry. My heart is racing, and I keep expecting to see a statue in the corner of this motel room. But there's nothing, just four walls, a flickering lamp, and me trying to hold myself together. Tomorrow, we'll find out if there's any release from this nightmare. If not, then at least I'll know I didn't run forever, and maybe that's all I can do. Walk back into that tunnel and see what's waiting for me in that empty chamber, under that swirling design, surrounded by those pillars. You'll find out soon enough. I walked into that old instrument shop on a Saturday morning. My throat felt dry because I hadn't slept much the night before. I was restless, trying to find some spark for a new composition. The shop smelled like old wood and resin. The walls were covered in violins, violas, and cellos with scratched finishes. I heard the distant hum of a small heater in the corner. The fluorescent lights flickered now and then. My eyes kept moving from one shelf to another, searching for anything that might stand out. I saw a few bows leaning against a chipped counter. Then I noticed a violin on a rack near the back. It looked worn, but not in a typical way. Its varnish had a dull sheen. The carved decorations on the neck and back looked precise, but also odd. I squinted at the carvings, small swirls and symbols that I couldn't decipher. My fingers tingled as if urging me to pick it up immediately. I approached the shopkeeper, an older man with thick glasses. His jacket was covered in dust. "I'm looking for a violin with character," I told him. He looked at me and shrugged, saying I could try any instrument I liked. I grabbed that strange violin from the rack. The weight of it felt substantial in my hands, the carvings pressing against my palm. The wood felt slightly rough. The faint smell of something identified, almost like burned material, wafted up when I held it under my chin. The chin rest felt cool against my skin. When I plucked the open strings, a resonance made my stomach tighten. There was a weird echo despite the shop's silence, broken only by the heater in the corner. I bowed a simple scale and heard a soft, lingering note behind each stroke, as if the violin was repeating what I played in hushed tones. I tried to ignore that feeling, but caught the shopkeeper giving me a strange look. "I don't know much about this violin," he said, "only that it's been here for a long time." He gave me a price that seemed reasonable. I didn't even try to bargain. I paid and took it home. Back in my apartment, I placed the violin on my sofa and just stared at it. My apartment was small. I had a desk for my compositions, a worn-out armchair, and a lamp with a weak bulb. There was no place to display the violin nicely, so I leaned it against the sofa. I couldn't stop looking at the carvings. They were spiraled and interlocked in complicated patterns. I felt uneasy but also excited. My heart was beating fast. I opened my windows to let some fresh air in. Cars passed by outside, horns blaring occasionally. I decided to do some warm-up exercises, so I grabbed the violin and started practicing a piece I'd been working on. While playing, I noticed the tone got darker with each run. It wasn't just an emotional feeling. It was in the actual sound. The notes sounded deeper, almost throaty, like the violin was trying to speak with its own voice. My hands shook a little, and I had to calm myself by breathing slowly. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. The echo from the shop was there again. It was faint, but seemed like each note repeated in a softer whisper. It didn't make sense to me because my apartment was cramped and had no special acoustics. I stopped and rested the violin on my lap. My heart was pounding. I tried to distract myself by tuning it again, turning the pegs slowly, and listening to the strings come into pitch. The tension in my chest didn't go away. I forced myself to keep practicing for a couple of hours. By the end, the sun had gone down and the room was dim. My eyes felt tired. I decided to put the violin in its case and close the lid. That night, I tossed and turned. Around 3 in the morning, I realized I was awake, sitting on the edge of my bed with the violin in my hands. My curtains were partially open, letting in a bit of street light. I blinked hard, trying to figure out when I'd gotten out of bed. I couldn't remember. My mind felt foggy. I noticed I was playing a slow, dragging melody on the violin. The notes were low and drawn out. My throat felt tight and my hands were trembling. I took a deep breath and forced myself to put the violin back in its case. I closed it and slid it under my bed. I crawled back under the covers, but my body was tense. I could still hear the last note echoing in my ears. It sounded like it was right next to me, even though the violin was tucked away. The next morning, I woke up groggy. My neck felt stiff. I saw the case under the bed, half open. I was sure I had closed it all the way. I felt uneasy. My stomach churned. I stood up, rubbed my eyes, and got dressed. I tried to have breakfast, but only managed a few bites of toast. My phone buzzed with messages, but I didn't feel like responding to anyone. I turned my focus to the violin again. I thought maybe I needed to figure out what was happening. I placed the case on my desk and opened it. The violin looked normal except for those carvings. I decided to clean it gently, wiping the wood with a soft cloth, checking the bridge and strings. Everything looked fine on the surface. I found a small piece of paper tucked inside a compartment of the case. It had some symbols on it that matched the carvings on the violin. No text, just the same swirls. I shoved it aside, not knowing what else to do with it. I started practicing again. The first few scales sounded all right. Then, as I moved to more complex passages, I heard that strange echo again. My throat felt dry. I tried to ignore it. The echo got louder in my head, like a second violin playing right behind me. I set the instrument down and massaged my temples. My hands were clammy. I decided to record myself with my phone to see if I was imagining it. When I played back the recording, all I heard was my single violin line. No echo, but in real time, I could still hear it. I caught myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone else with a violin. I was alone. By the end of that practice session, the sound had turned deeper again, as if the violin were shifting on its own. The E string usually has a bright, crisp tone, but now it sounded almost like a muted version of itself. I wiped sweat from my forehead and walked around my apartment to clear my head. I opened the fridge, drank some water, then returned to my desk. I decided I needed a break from playing. I placed the violin back in its case and firmly clicked it shut. I stuffed it in my bedroom closet behind some old jackets. That afternoon, I tried to focus on writing sheet music at my desk. I jotted down some melodies, but nothing sounded right. My mind wandered back to that violin. My eyes flicked to the bedroom door. A creeping sense of dread crept into my stomach. I turned on some music on my phone, just to have background noise. The day passed slowly. I didn't practice anymore. I tried to watch some TV, but I couldn't concentrate on the show. Every so often I thought I heard a faint tone coming from the closet. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, listening. Nothing. My head throbbed. Late that night I dozed off in the armchair. A sharp sound woke me. I realized I was holding the violin again. I jumped, nearly dropping it. My chest tightened. My hands felt cold. I blinked at the living room lamp, which was still on. I must have fallen asleep with it on. I had no idea how or when I pulled the violin out. I looked around, feeling disoriented. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. My pulse pounded in my ears. I felt my skin prickling on my arms. The room was quiet, but the violin felt warm in my hands, like it had been played for hours. My fingertips were sore. I forced myself to set it down on the coffee table. I paced around the living room, stepping on a creaky floorboard. My thoughts were jumbled. I tried to figure out if I was losing my mind. I decided to turn on all the lights in the apartment. The bathroom, the kitchen, every lamp, just to push away the shadows. I couldn't stand the darkness. I stared at the violin on the coffee table. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through social media on my phone, but my eyes kept returning to the instrument. I felt like it was watching me, even though that makes no sense. I didn't see anything move, but my body stayed tense. I sat down again and picked up the violin, determined to see if I could control whatever was happening. I played an A minor scale. The tone was darker than ever. It sounded heavy, not bright at all. Each note vibrated through my fingers in a way that made my arm hairs stand on end. I heard that echo again, but it was stronger now, like a soft hum hovering in the air. I felt short of breath. The back of my neck tingled. My hands shook and the bow slid across the string with a scratchy sound. I stopped playing. The echo continued for a moment, then faded. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart race. I muttered to myself, wondering if anyone else had ever experienced something like this. I looked at my window, half expecting to see a neighbor's lights on, but everything outside was still. That same night, I couldn't sleep. I paced back and forth in my living room, occasionally glancing at the violin. It was still on the coffee table. I decided not to put it away. I felt like it wanted to be there, in plain sight. My eyes burned from lack of rest. Around 2 in the morning I noticed my ears picking up faint whispers. I couldn't make out words, but it felt like someone was in the next room talking in a low voice. I thought maybe it was a neighbor. I moved to the wall and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. The sound seemed to come from the violin instead. I slowly turned my head and saw it resting on the table. The hair on my arm stood up again. My pulse pounded, and I swallowed hard before walking to the violin. I lifted it, feeling a strange warmth in the wood. I asked out loud if anyone was there like an idiot talking to an instrument. No response. I just heard my own breathing and the buzz of my refrigerator in the kitchen. I tried playing a short piece I knew well. The notes felt unfamiliar. My left hand's fingertips were sore from pressing down on the strings, and my bow arms started to ache. I felt sweat trickle down my temple. The echo grew more intense. Like another violin was right beside me. I stopped playing and clutched the violin against my chest. My heart thundered. The echo lingered. It felt like the room was full of sound, yet everything else was silent. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to put the instrument back on the table. I stared at it, waiting for the echo to fade. It finally did after a few seconds. Days passed. Every time I practiced, the violin's timbre got darker. It sounded almost muffled, but with a strange undercurrent that felt alive. I heard whispers late at night, sometimes coming from the direction of the violin case or right behind me. My body was always on edge. My hands were shaky. My stomach hurt. And I started drinking more coffee just to stay awake. I didn't want to sleep because I feared I'd wake up with that violin in my hands again. I tried locking it in the closet, but I still heard it. I tried stuffing it under blankets, but the sound seeped through. I felt trapped. One evening, I attempted to compose something new. I scribbled notes on staff paper, trying to piece together a slow melody. My pen tapped against the desk. I started humming the line to myself. Then I realized I could hear the violin echoing my humming from inside its case. My throat tightened and I froze. The case was closed, but the violin sounded like it was responding. My eyes darted around the room. No one else was there. I walked up to the case and flicked the latch. I opened it slowly. The violin was still. I put my hand on it. It felt slightly warm, like it had been played recently. My thoughts raced. I shut the case and stepped back. At that point, I was sure the violin wanted something from me. I had no idea what. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but the physical sensations were too strong to dismiss. I heard real sounds and felt real heat from the wood. I tried to focus on the facts. The violin was old, the carvings were unusual, and I experienced weird echoes that didn't show up on recordings. My body was reacting with nervous tension and I was losing sleep. Those were the facts I could see, hear, or feel. I had no explanation for them. Late one night I sat on the floor leaning against my sofa staring at the closed violin case. I was exhausted, my muscles ached, my eyes were heavy. I started drifting off, but a whisper pulled me out of my haze. I heard my name. It was faint, but it came from the direction of the case. My heart raced. I stood up too fast and got dizzy. I grabbed the sofa to steady myself. My head pounded. I could hear my breathing, shaky and loud in my own ears. The case remained still. The whisper faded. I felt sweat on my palms. I didn't know what else to do, so I walked over and opened the case. I took the violin out. My hands trembled. I placed it on my shoulder and started playing the melody I'd heard that first night. I didn't even remember learning it, but the notes came to me without effort. They were slow and dark with a steady pulse. The violin echoed again, louder than before. My arms were tense, and my back felt tight. I kept playing until I could barely move my fingers. When I finally stopped, I realized the apartment felt colder. My teeth chattered. I set the violin down. I fell back onto the sofa and stared at the ceiling. My body was exhausted, but my mind was wired. I listened for any last echoes. They died away after a few moments. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. The next day, I tried not to touch the violin at all. I left it out on the sofa in plain sight. I still heard faint murmurs, especially when I walked by. I started to wonder if I should get rid of it, maybe return it or sell it. But the thought of someone else dealing with this unsettled me, and I also felt tied to it. I had composed more in those last days than I had in months. The music was new. It wasn't bright or uplifting, but it was authentic. I could feel it in my bones. I'm still here in my apartment, with the violin sitting on a chair across the room. I keep hearing small sounds like gentle knocks or soft scratching. My shoulders are stiff and my neck hurts from tension. My mind is locked onto those carvings on the violin's back and neck. They look so detailed in this dim light. I see each swirl and groove. I try not to stare for too long. Tonight, I plan to record a new piece that came to me in a half-dream. I expect the echo will appear again, and I'll feel my pulse racing and my palms will sweat. But I can't stop now. This violin might be pulling me into something I don't understand, but it's also given me a direction for my muse. My chest feels tight when I think about what might happen if I keep playing it, but I can't put it away for good. Even if I close the case, I can still hear it echoing in my head. So, you'll keep playing and wait to see if the voice within that wood reveals something more. I'm tired of fighting it. You'll keep practicing until I find whatever truth is locked inside those carvings. I can turn back. I just hope I can keep my sanity along the way.